Chapter 124. How could the people in Huan Shi Mountain Manor know what was happening in the distance? They were talking about what had just happened in high spirits. Thinking about Stone Ox's power, they were deeply envious. Many of them secretly made up their minds to work harder when they returned to the sect and strive to have such a powerful moment in the future. Only the Stone Cow was still the same as before. He steadily drove the carriage forward, as if he did not have the consciousness of being treated as an idol. Fortunately, he had just gone through a so-called great battle, so he was not in the mood to sing his best songs. Otherwise, the image that he had just established in everyone's hearts might immediately collapse. Of course, not everyone in the manor was in high spirits or calm as water. The only one who was not happy was He Tianshu. He Tianshu could not be said to be particularly outstanding among the disciples of Misty School, but he was still considered one of the best. Although he had been sent to Huan Shi Mountain Manor to manage the herbal field, his martial arts were still there. Otherwise, how could he have become the team leader? He originally knew that there was a gap between him and Stone Ox, but he did not know how big the gap was. Now, it seemed that he had fought with Stone Ox for a long time and still had some strength left. Stone Ox, on the other hand, had fought with Stone Ox for a long time and sent him flying with only one palm, injuring him and causing him to vomit blood. Now it seemed that the gap between him and Stone Ox was not small. It seemed that he had been too arrogant in the past. In the future, he still had a long way to go. Among them, there was one person who was not very similar to the others. He was the simple-minded Zhang Xiaohua. He did not learn martial arts systematically, so naturally, he did not know the difficulties, especially when he saw Stone Ox send the strong man flying with one palm. He seemed to be reminded of his previous experience and immediately lost interest. Therefore, when the others were discussing, he had already picked up a book silently and was reading by himself. He did not even notice He Tianshu's self-deprecation. The robbery incident was like a wave in the river, disappearing in a flash. Soon, it became a joke after a meal. Even in the next town, when the Misty School's disciples came to pick them up, it was only mentioned as a pastime. However, Lan Dong, a disciple of the Misty School in this small town, was a careful person. After listening to it, he felt that something was not right. It was normal that the people of Huanxi Villa did not know about it. After all, they were from other places. He had been operating here for several years, so why hadn't he heard of any bandits? Moreover, it was the kind that didn't do anything ordinary. However, he could not tell these thoughts to Yin and the others. After all, they had already asserted that this was a group of stupid bandits. Moreover, such a group of bandits might have appeared when he was not paying attention. The only thing he could do was to quickly write down his thoughts on a note and report it to his leader to let them make a decision. Moreover, he also believed that once his leader saw the news about Villa Chifo, he would immediately report it to the higher-ups in the sect. He would definitely not dare to delay. After this news spread, he was slightly relieved. The next thing he had to do was to find an opportunity to explain to Villa Chief Stone Ox and the others so that they would be more vigilant. However, when he told Yin and the others about this situation, it was not out of his expectations. Yin and Stone Ox did not take it seriously. Only Aunt Sheen frowned slightly and wanted to say something. However, when she saw Yin's determined gaze, she closed her mouth. She knew that Yin wanted to go to Rejuvenation Valley wholeheartedly. At this time, she would not believe anything she said. However, speaking of which, who would know that Yin had gone to Rejuvenation Valley? Even if someone knew, what reason did they have to stop her? Could it be that they had nothing better to do? When Lan Dong saw that his words did not attract any attention, he did not say anything more. However, when Yin left, he proposed to send a disciple to escort her. However, he was also rejected. This was because there were not many disciples from the Misty School in the small town, and their martial arts were at the standard of an ordinary disciple. Only this Lan Dong was like Tianshu. However, he could not leave the small town for a long time. Unless it was meaningful for him to escort, the others would do their best. On the other hand, Yin used the reason that she did not want to affect the daily operations of the Misty School and rejected Lan Dong's good intentions. Thus, the group of people once again drove the carriage forward. As for Lan Dong, he returned to the small town and continued with his daily business. It was not until the second night, after Yin and the others left, that there was news from the Misty School. When Lan Dong opened the note sent by the carrier pigeon, his expression could not help but change greatly. On it was written, "Misty Mountain Villa has already sent an elder to provide support." When they received the news, they immediately sent out all their forces to protect the villa chief. Along the way, the Misty School's forces will prioritize the villa chief's safety. Lan Dong could not help but complain in his heart. It had already been 2.5 days since Yin and the others left. Who knew what had happened? He hurriedly wrote down the situation briefly and released the carrier pigeon to pass the news to the disciples of the Misty School in the next small town. However, this place was no longer within the Misty School's sphere of influence. The Misty School's manpower was very spread out, and the other small towns were not very far from here. Whether they could make it in time was still a problem. He could only send the news first. After finishing these matters, Lan Dong immediately gathered all the disciples of the Misty School in the small town. They rode their horses and followed the path that Yin and the others had taken. After bidding farewell to Lan Dong and the rest of the ethereal sex disciples, Yin and the rest continued to follow the route they had planned and continued to move forward without stopping. However, after the farce of the robbery, they had become even more vigilant. When they came across some suspicious places, they would first send people to investigate before passing through. Just like this, a few days passed, and no more accidents occurred. Hence, the anxious hearts of the group gradually relaxed. Actually, to them, the robberies and killings in the pugilistic world were really nothing. Stone Cow and Aunt Sheen, which one of them had not walked through a rain of blood. However, it was obvious that they did not have enough manpower this time, and they still had to protect Yin. Thus, they had to think twice before they acted and did not dare to make any mistakes. They traveled like this for another 3 days. On this evening, the sun was setting in the west, and the evening mist was heavy. Seeing that they had arrived at a place in the middle of nowhere, and looking at the map, they were still far from the next town. Presumably, they would have to sleep in the wild tonight. Thus, Aunt Sheen hurriedly ordered Stone Cow to walk all the way and find a place to rest. When the sky gradually darkened, the carriage finally arrived at the side of a small river. There was a spacious open space by the river, and it was just nice to set up a tent. Thus, everyone stopped the carriage and took everything from the carriage, preparing to sleep here for the night. Although setting up the camp, burying the pot, and other matters did not have much to do with Zhang Xiaohua. But during this period of time, Zhang Xiaohua was very harmonious with everyone. How could she not help? Not to mention other things, Zhang Xiaohua had a lot of strength. She helped the male and female disciples carry things, set up the tent, and so on. She was so busy that everyone liked this diligent child even more. By the time everyone was done, the sky was already completely dark. Everyone had their own tasks. A group of male disciples went to guard the surroundings while the female disciples and some people from the mountain villa lived and cooked. Only Zhang Xiaohua was left with nothing to do. Zhang Xiaohua saw that it was still early for dinner, so she looked around. She saw a dark patch not far away. It seemed to be a small forest. Her heart skipped a beat. Why not use this time to pick up some firewood in the forest and finish today's homework together? Thinking about this, Zhang Xiaohua stood up and prepared to walk out. After taking a few steps, she heard someone calling her. She turned around and saw that it was Chiu Tong. Yin and Aunt Sheen were beside her. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly stopped and bowed to them with a smile. After greeting them separately, Chiu Tong asked, "Zhang Xiaohua, are you going out?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "I saw that it was still early for dinner, so I wanted to go to the forest over there to pick up some firewood. It'll be useful in the evening." Chiu Tong said, "What a good child. You even know how to pick up firewood." Zhang Xiaohua quickly said modestly, "It's nothing, Sister Chiu Tong. I often do this at home." At this time, Yin asked, "After picking up the firewood, do you still need to practice martial arts?" Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and asked, "Sister O, how did you know?" Yin smiled and said, You went out to find a place to practice martial arts every morning and night. How could you hide it from our eyes and ears? However, Zhang Xiaohua, you've really exceeded our expectations. You're very diligent. Also, I heard from He Tianshu that you read books every day. You've already read a lot of the books I borrowed from you. Zhang Xiaohua's face was a little red. She said embarrassedly, Sister, I didn't have a choice. I only learned a few scattered fist techniques. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to practice them well, so I could only practice them secretly. That sword technique was also taught by Elder Yu. He didn't want others to know about it. I was also afraid that I would forget, so I could only avoid others. Oyin giggled and said, I don't mean to blame you. I just admire your diligence. Naturally, I know a thing or two about Elder Yu's sword technique. You can practice as much as you want. Actually, other people didn't really peek at you. Seeing that you're so focused on martial arts, when this matter is over, I'll talk to my brother and see if you have a good opportunity. Who was Oyan's brother? He was the leader of the Misty School. A casual word from him could fulfill Zhang Xiaohua's dream. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't believe her ears and was stunned. Qiu Tong saw Zhang Xiaohua's silly look and said softly, Zhang Xiaohua, why aren't you thanking the young miss? Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have woken up from a dream. Her face was filled with excitement as she said happily, Thank you, Sister O. If I have a chance, I'll definitely practice martial arts well. Oyin said, Zhang Xiaohua, don't be happy too early. I'm just saying, whether it'll work or not, it's still up to you. Zhang Xiaohua said, It's fine as long as there's a chance. Sister O, I'll definitely fight for it. Oh, right, there's one more thing. I don't know if I should say it. Oyin asked curiously, What is it? Speak. Zhang Xiaohua said embarrassedly, Captain, he also wants to read the book you lent me. Is that okay? Oyin was happy and said, It's fine. He Tianshu isn't an outsider. If someone from the pharmacy wants to learn about botany, it's fine as long as he doesn't teach it to anyone else. All right, don't damage my book. Otherwise, I won't let him read it. Zhang Xiaohua was relieved. Ever since He Tianshu had given him the small sword, he had been looking for an opportunity to tell Oyin about He Tianshu's book reading. However, along the way, there had not been any good opportunities. Today, he had finally finished his thoughts. He could not help but feel relieved. After all, he had received a gift from someone, and his mouth was bound to be tied. At this time, a pleasant voice sounded. Zhang Xiaohua, how's your right hand recovering? Can you hold a sword? Zhang Xiaohua looked gratefully at Aunt Qin and said, Big Sister Qin, thank you for your concern. It's fine. It's recovering very quickly. I can hold a sword now, but it's still not flexible enough. Aunt Qin said, Not flexible enough fingers is a big flaw in practicing the sword. You have to practice well. Also, you have to pay attention to moderation. Don't overwork yourself. It's not good if you hurt your fingers. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I know. I've been doing recovery exercises. When I feel pain, I'll immediately stop. The four of them chatted for a while before Zhang Xiaohua said goodbye and left. However, after taking a few steps, Oyin reminded her again, Zhang Xiaohua, don't go too far. Finish practicing and come back early. There might be a storm tonight. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua looked up at the sky. Sure enough, the sky was gloomy. The stars that were usually as bright as pearls were nowhere to be seen. Even the full moon was nowhere to be seen. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I know, Big Sister O. I'll come back after practicing. I'm still waiting for dinner. After speaking, she waved at the three of them and walked towards the dark place alone. When Zhang Xiaohua reached that place, she discovered that it wasn't a forest, but a small hill. He couldn't pick up firewood, but it didn't delay his practice. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua first took out his beloved small sword and practiced the sword move with ease. After many days of practice, this sword move was even more refined. It was different from the first time he used the small sword to poke a big hole in the bamboo. During this period of time, Zhang Xiaohua mainly practiced the control of the small sword strength. Now, his control of strength was very exquisite. When the strength was high, he could easily poke a big hole in something in front of him, such as a rock or a big tree. When the strength was low, under the same speed, he could lightly tap on a big tree, leaving only a small dot. This could be considered a little trick that Zhang Xiaohua figured out himself after he practiced the sword move. Oyen was right. When Zhang Xiaohua practiced his Fist of the North Star 9 times, the familiar cold current flowed through his body and the raindrops fell pitter-patter. Since today's homework was finished, Zhang Xiaohua naturally didn't stay any longer and quickly ran back to the campsite. But when he was halfway there, he suddenly had a strange feeling and couldn't help but stop, allowing the raindrops to fall even more densely on his body. But when he calmed down and listened carefully, other than the bonfire in front of the villa, everyone's hurried footsteps and people's shouts of "it's raining, put away the clothes," there didn't seem to be any other movement. The pitter-patter of the raindrops was either dull or clear, covering up other movements in the world. The rain became heavier and heavier. Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to stay any longer and quickly rushed back to the campsite. And on the small hill where he was practicing his fist technique, a person dressed in night clothes with a hood over his face quietly poked his head out and coldly looked at his back. Then he looked at the night sky dripping with rain and smiled with satisfaction. With a bend of his body, he used his qing gong and disappeared into the distance. Zhang Xiaohua ran into the campsite, and it was chaos. The rain came too quickly, and although everyone was prepared, they were still thrown into confusion by the torrential rain. By the time everyone had finished packing up their things, the rain was already pouring down like water. Zhang Xiaohua was in the same tent as He Tianshu. By the time he entered, He Tianshu had already finished packing up and said with a smile, "You want to practice your fist technique again? You're all soaked." Then he casually handed over a dry towel to him. Zhang Xiaohua smiled as he received it and said, "It just started to rain when I was practicing my fist technique." This rain was to help them pack up their things. Then Zhang Xiaohua used the dry towel to wipe the rain off his head. Only then did he remember and said, "I saw the Manor Lord just now. She said that she agreed to let you read her book. However, you can't spread it out and you can't damage the book." He Tianshu said, "Then I'll have to thank you, Xiaohua." Zhang Xiaohua found it strange and said, "Isn't it the same if you tell the Manor Lord yourself? Why do you need me to say it for you? You can see her every day. I've been delayed for a few days and only saw the Manor Lord today." He Tianshu said awkwardly, "Well, you're still young, so you don't really understand. After all, Manor Lord O is the Manor Lord of Huanxi Manor, and I'm a disciple of the Misty School's pharmacy hall. I'm afraid it's not appropriate to mention it rashly." Zhang Xiaohua seemed to understand and nodded. Then he thought of something and said, "That's right. I still have to thank Captain He for putting in a good word for me in front of the Manor Lord. The Manor Lord said that when we go back, she'll find an opportunity to talk to Chief O and let me learn martial arts." "Ah, really?" He Tianshu didn't seem to believe it and asked in return, "The Manor Lord really told you that?" "Yes." Zhang Xiaohua happily nodded. He Tianshu smiled and said, "I'm just telling you the truth. You're able to gain the Manor Lord's favor. That's your chance. In the future, when you have the chance, you must properly repay the Manor Lord." Zhang Xiaohua said, "That's right, I definitely will. The Manor Lord is like an elder sister to me. I'll definitely repay her." He Tianshu said again, "However, practicing martial arts depends on luck. Your body hasn't recovered yet. Even if you practice martial arts, you might not be able to succeed. You must be mentally prepared. Moreover, there are many disciples in the Misty School who are as hardworking as you. You're just in Huanxi Manor. Compared to Ma Jing and the others, you seem to be very hardworking. In the future, you have to work harder." Zhang Xiaohua's expression became serious and said, "I know, Captain He. You're all very good to me. I'll definitely work hard to practice martial arts." He Tianshu smiled and walked forward. He patted his shoulder and said, "When I was young, I was also as hot-blooded as you. Do well, I have high hopes for you." Then he frowned and said, "The rain is so heavy. Our camp is still near the river. There won't be any danger in the middle of the night, right? I have to go and discuss with Shernyo and the others. Zhang Xiaohua, you should rest early." While they were talking, suddenly, outside of the tent, there seemed to be a dense sound of horse hooves. He Tianshu and Zhang Xiaohua looked at each other vigilantly and walked out of the tent at the same time. Chapter 125. Outside the tent, the raindrops formed a line and hung in the air. Their eyes were full of white raindrops, and they couldn't see far away. However, the sound of the horses' hooves was very orderly, shaking the ground a little. Although they couldn't see clearly, the sound had been heard and became louder and louder. Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand what was going on, but he could smell the danger. However, the experienced He Tianshu had already changed his face and shouted to Zhang Xiaohua, "Zhang Xiaohua, quickly hide in the tent and find a place to hide or escape from the side a moment. You don't know martial arts, so you can't do anything here. You must stay alive and report to gang leader later." After that, he pulled out his long sword and rushed out quickly. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned on the spot. Hide? Escape? He was confused for a while. Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand the seriousness of the situation. Didn't they encounter bandits a few days ago, and they were easily defeated? Why were they so serious now? Why did they have to escape by themselves? In fact, he didn't know that when He Tianshu heard the orderly sound of the horses' hooves, he knew that this was a group trained by the military and should be targeting Oyen. Only the big gangs in Jianghu could do such a thing. Since it was a gang's robbery, they must have a strict plan and not leave the routes. Although there were many people in Huanchi Villa, no one could escape. Except for a few people who would be caught alive, the fate of the others could almost be decided now. Zhang Xiaohua was just a child and was small. In such a night, it was really possible for him to escape. On one hand, he could keep his life, and, on the other hand, he could report the news to Opong. On the other hand, he couldn't let the others die in peace. Moreover, He Tianshu wanted Zhang Xiaohua to escape at that time, but the situation was unclear. If he ran away first, wouldn't it be a joke? Moreover, to be honest, the other party must have done a lot of preparation in advance. Now there might be an ambush around the camp. If he escaped at this time, it was tantamount to walking into a trap. On the contrary, he could escape in a chaotic battle later. How could Zhang Xiaohua know about He Tianshu's plan? Time was of the essence, so he naturally could not explain it in detail. If He Tianshu turned around and saw Zhang Xiaohua's dazed look, he would definitely vomit blood in anger. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the pouring rain outside and hesitated for a moment. Then, she walked into the tent and blew out the light. She carefully stood in the shadow of the tent entrance and poked her head out to observe carefully. As for He Tianshu, he rushed out his tent in the rain and immediately used his qing gong to rush towards Oyen's tent. Although He Tianshu's tent was only a dozen steps away from Oyen's tent, He Tianshu did not dare to be negligent. When He Tianshu arrived in front of Oyen's tent, before he even got close, he heard a voice calling out, "Who is it?" He Tianshu quickly stopped and shouted, "It's me, He Tianshu." At this moment, the voice in the tent sounded again. "Captain He, please come in." When He Tianshu walked to the entrance of the tent's curtain was opened. He Tianshu looked up and saw Shernyo. When He Tianshu walked into the tent, he saw that there were already many people inside. Aunt Qin, Oyen, Xiaotong, Shernyo, and a few female disciples. He Tianshu did not delay and said to Shernyo, "Senior brother, you must have heard the commotion." Shernyo's face was stiff as he nodded and did not speak. He Tianshu knew his personality and did not mind. He turned to ask Aunt Qin, "Hall Master Qin, what should we do?" Aunt Qin said, "We'll deal with the situation as it arises. Since things have reached this point, we have been too careless. Changgu, take a few disciples and prepare the horses. When the fight starts, mix together. Protect the manor lord and break out of the encirclement. Then return to the town we passed by a few days ago and find Lan Dong and the others." A female disciple in the tent agreed and took 2 people out in the rain. Then, Aunt Qin ordered the rest of the disciples to go to their respective tents. She instructed everyone to take out their weapons and prepare for battle. At this moment, the sound of horse hooves that covered the sound of the rain stopped. He Tianshu walked out of the tent with his sword in hand. When he saw everything in front of him, he could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. Not far away, there was a row of horses. It was hard to tell how many there were in the dark, but the horses stood still in the wind and rain. They must have been trained for a long time. The people on the horses were dressed in night clothes and had black masks over their heads. It was impossible to see the origin of this group of people. At this moment, Shernyo, Aunt Sheen, and a group of male and female disciples all took out their weapons and walked out of the tent. They stood in the rain with their heads held high and faced the black, clothed people. Seeing that the people on the other side did not move, He Tianshu turned around to look at Shernyo and the others. He then circulated his internal energy and shouted, "Friends on the other side, why are you surrounding our camp? Is there a problem?" The black-clothed people on the other side still did not move. He Tianshu could not help but frown. Just as he was about to say something, the sound of hurried horse hooves came from behind the black-clothed people. It came from afar and soon arrived in front of them. The black-clothed people seemed to know that it was their helper. They all opened up a path for the horse to rush to the front. When that person arrived in front of everyone, they could only vaguely see a short black-clothed person sitting on a majestic horse. His face was also covered by a black mask. When the horse stopped, the black-clothed person lightly snorted. It was like a needle piercing in a He Tianshu's ear, causing his blood and qi to surge. He Tianshu felt that he had to circulate his internal energy to suppress this surging internal energy. He Tianshu was shocked. This kind of internal energy was top-notch in Jianghu. He did not know who this person was, but he actually wanted to kill him tonight. Open up. Thinking of this, He Tianshu held his sword and cupped his fists. He circulated his internal energy and said, "The person in front must be a senior. I don't know why you can't forget my Misty School's disciples. If I have offended you in any way, after today, I will bring a bramble and ask for punishment." The black-clothed person at this time also spoke. His voice was slightly hoarse and old. "You are only a low-ranking disciple of the Misty School. You don't have the qualifications to speak to me. There is also no need to curry favor with me. You must have seen today's situation clearly. If you know what's good for you, quickly surrender and obediently return with us. Otherwise, don't blame us for offending the heavens." Before he finished speaking, Aunt Sheen's clear voice rang out. "The scoundrel on the other side, since you dare to sneak attack us, why don't you dare to show your true face? You dare to wander the Jianghu without daring to show your name." It was still the same old voice. He said calmly, "Aunt Sheen's voice is still as good as ever. You also lived a carefree life in the Misty School. How would you know the feeling of drifting in the Jianghu? You must have forgotten it long ago. This kind of provocation is useless. You still want to stall for time. In this wilderness, what kind of reinforcements do you have? Stop the idle chatter and surrender. Otherwise, I will give the order." After he finished speaking, that person raised his right hand. Since things had come to this point, there was naturally nothing to discuss. In fact, He Tianshu's words did have the intention of stalling for time, but he also knew that this was just a fantasy. His side only had so much strength, and looking at the formation of the black-clothed men, he was afraid that they had already figured out his situation and looked as if they had already won. Looking at the black-clothed person's arm falling bit by bit, He Tianshu didn't dare to make a decision. He turned around to look at Aunt Sheen and the stone cow. He saw Aunt Sheen and the stone cow look at each other. Then both leaped up and pounced at the black-clothed person outside. Thus, He Tianshu didn't hesitate and also pounced in the other direction. As for the remaining disciples, they all roared and pounced with weapons in their hands. Only a few female disciples were left behind. They held long swords in their hands and protected Oyan's tent. When the black-clothed person saw the Misty School's group rushing out, his arms suddenly dropped and he spat out a word, "Kill." That voice actually caused everyone's hearts to tremble. The black-clothed people all swung their stirrups and dismounted. They tiptoed and went to meet the Misty School's group. In an instant, the two groups of people were standing together. Just as He Tianshu was about to charge forward, a black shadow suddenly swept past from above. With a sharp whistle, the shadow said, "Surnamed he, your opponent is me." Before the shadow finished speaking, a long sword pierced towards He Tianshu's chest like lightning. He Tianshu was shocked. He dodged with a sidestep and calmed down a little. He immediately formed a sword seal and returned the favor. The two of them attacked and defended each other. Sword light flashed. After dozens of moves, there was no clear winner. The stone ox also met an opponent halfway. That person was holding a chi-mei cudgel. When he waved it around, it made a humming sound. The falling raindrops seemed to be blown away by him. Although the stone ox didn't have a weapon, when he used the mighty King Kong hand, it didn't seem to be inferior to that person's. His moves were wide, and he only attacked the black-clothed man's vital points. As for his own body, other than his vital points, he still had to defend himself. As for the other places, when the cudgel hit them, it only made him frown slightly. Under the stone cow's reckless attacks, the black-clothed person couldn't help but be at a disadvantage. Today, Aunt Chin also abandoned her snake fist and took out her weapon. It was a flexible sword. Under Aunt Chin's dancing, it was like a nimble snake coming out of its hole. Every move drew blood. In just a short moment of contact with the black-clothed people, several of them were injured. Just as Aunt Chin was in the mood to kill, a red-tasseled spear suddenly came out from the side. Like a fierce dragon, it was aimed at her face. Aunt Chin didn't panic. She exerted strength in her legs and flipped into the air. The spear barely pierced through her body. Aunt Chin was in the air, and she stabbed her sword at the wrist holding the spear. The black-clothed person wasn't simple either. Seeing the spear miss and the flexible sword stabbing towards him, he squatted down slightly and dodged the sword. His left foot took the opportunity to kick upwards. It was aimed at Aunt Chin's abdomen. Seeing that this move didn't work, Aunt Chin immediately retracted her momentum and changed her move. Thus, the two of them started fighting. At this time, all the black-clothed people, except for the one with the old voice who came last, had already dismounted and attacked. The old man in black sat steadily on his horse. Seeing that He Tianshu, the stone cow, and Aunt Chin were all stopped by his own people, he finally calmed down and looked at the other battles. Oyen didn't bring too many disciples with her this time. After all, they were all trained by the Misty School. Moreover, which of them are mediocre? On the other hand, although the black-robed men outnumbered those from the villa, they could not bring too many people with them when they acted in secret, so they did not have an absolute advantage in terms of numbers. Moreover, in order to avoid failure and being found out by others, these black-robed men were not disciples of that gang, so their martial arts level was inferior to that of the disciples of Huanxi Villa. Therefore, when the two sides fought, 1 or 2 or 3 black-robed men fought against a disciple of a villa, but it was still a tie. When he saw the situation in the field, the old man in black calmed down and seemed to have a card up his sleeve. In his mind, there was no need for his lord to be so cautious. He let the elites and 1 or 2 elders of the faction come over. Wouldn't they be dealt with quickly and easily? Even if they were recognized, what could they do? He was already his prisoner. What else could he do? However, his lord had always been cautious. He'd better act according to the plan. Anyway, the current situation was still under his control. As long as he captured the leader, he could go back and report. Thinking about this, the old man in black looked at the tent that He Tianshu and the others came out of. There were still a few female disciples guarding it, blocking the entry of the black-clothed people. Just as the old man in black was thinking about Oyen, there were some changes on He Tianshu's side. He Tianshu stared at the black-clothed person for a while. Suddenly, he felt that the swordsmanship was somewhat familiar. After thinking carefully, he suddenly shouted, "You're the second master of the robbery path a few days ago? You actually used a saber to perform swordsmanship. No wonder I felt that the swordsmanship was familiar." The black-clothed person laughed and said, "Very good. The disciples of the Misty School are indeed extraordinary. You even recognize me like this. I used a saber to fight you to a draw. Today, I'll let you see my true power." After saying that, the swordsmanship changed again. It was fast and strange. In the night, He Tianshu was not careful and was stabbed in the right arm. Fortunately, he saw it quickly and quickly withdrew his sword to protect himself. Only then did he suffer a light injury. Even so, the blood flowed down his arm and dripped to the ground with the rain. He Tianshu saw that the situation was not good. He did not dare to hide anymore. He raised the tip of his sword and performed the secret swordsmanship of the Misty School disciples. One move after another, he fought with the black-clothed person again. Since the one who fought with Tianshu was the second master, then the one who fought with the stone ox must be the first master. Unfortunately, the first master used a chi may stick today. His moves were completely different. Although his figure did not change, how could the stone ox recognize him? The stone ox was too lazy to think about it, even if the first master was still using a saber. The question of, how come the person who was beaten by me to vomit blood is standing in front of me now? Is his martial arts even better than that day? How could it be compared to smashing someone to death with a fist? Although the first master had considered the stone ox's martial arts, he had still underestimated it. Now it seemed that he had been at a disadvantage and could only hold on. However, his task was only to prevent the stone ox from being distracted. Wasn't the black-clothed old man, who was more powerful than the stone ox, still on the horse? Yes, the old man in black was still sitting on the horse and did not make any movements. At this time, the people of the Huanxi Manor were like a piece of meat on the chopping board. They were being pulled by the black-clothed person's saber bit by bit. They were only waiting for the final moment when the butcher's saber slid down. There was some ridicule in the eyes of the old man in black, as if he was playing a game of cat and mouse. He seemed to be able to hear the moans of the opponent in his ears. He enjoyed it very much. At this time, the fighting in the field had reached its climax. From time to time, there were screams. Perhaps it was the black-clothed person or the people of the manor. However, except for the old man in black and Zhang Xiaohua, who was hiding in the shadow of the tent, the others probably had no time to care about it. In such a dark night, as long as they could save their own lives, it was more important than anything else. And our poor Zhang Xiaohua really did not know what to do at this time. In his 13-year life journey, he had experienced the fight in Luzhun and the fight with the bandits of Shizue Mountain on the way back to the Guizhuang house from 8 Mile Ditch. Although he was also a participant in these two fights, he played the role of a guinea pig from the beginning. Because he did not have any martial strength, he was knocked down with one kick. Now that he had a trace of power to protect himself, he was eager to have a try. On the other hand, Lu Zhen's encounter was not life-threatening. Although the fight in Shizue Mountain was very bloody, Lu Yueming controlled it very well. Zhang Xiaohua did not feel that his life was in danger. However, today was different. There were continuous fights in the field. From time to time, people were injured and lost their lives. In the eyes of Zhang Xiaohua, this cruel scene gave rise to a deep sense of oppression. It made Zhang Xiaohua a little breathless. It made Zhang Xiaohua only want to escape from the scene. Moreover, didn't he Tianshu also tell him to find a chance to run away when the situation became chaotic? But what about Sister O and Sister Chiotong? For a moment, Zhang Xiaohua was in a dilemma. However, he had forgotten that if he stayed, he would not be of any help. He was only standing on the side of his conscience and ignoring his own abilities. However, fortunately, for the time being, the black-robed men and the disciples of Huanxi Mountain Villa were in a state of balance. Although many people on both sides had lost their fighting capacity, they were still evenly matched. The black-robed men did not have extra people in the tent, so Zhang Xiaohua was still safe. There were 7 or 8 tents in the camp of Huanxi Mountain Villa. They were all set up around Yan's tent in the middle. Zhang Xiaohua's tent was on one side. Just as Zhang Xiaohua hesitated for a moment, suddenly he saw a sword light flashing behind Yan's tent. The tent was cut open and several people came out. Because of the darkness, he could not see clearly, but they must be Yan's group. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. He moved and was about to run over there. However, at this moment, the black-clothed old man who was sitting on the horse moved his eyes. He exerted strength in his legs and stepped on the horse's back. His arms shook, and he flew off from the horse's back like a big bird. He flew straight towards the tent in the middle. After a few leaps, he arrived in front of the tent. "Please collect it. Thank you." Chapter 126. Although Shernyo, Aunt Sheen, He Tian Shu, and the others were fighting with their lives on the line, some of their attention was focused on the old man in black. Now that they saw the old man fly into the camp, their hearts tightened, and their moves became even fiercer. They wanted to quickly retreat and block the old man. But how could their opponents let them do as they wished? They also used all of their strength and attacked even harder. Even Shernyo's opponent, who was at a disadvantage before, quickly changed his moves when he saw the old man attack. His inner strength also became fiercer, causing Shernyo to be flustered and lose the upper hand. For a moment, he couldn't escape. Presumably, this was the old man in black's wishful thinking. The old man in black arrived in front of the tent, but he didn't directly enter. Instead, he slowly walked to the back of the tent, as if he already knew that the people inside had broken through the tent and escaped from the back. Oyen and Xiao Tong, under the cover of a few female disciples, came out of the tent. They had just taken a few steps when they saw the old man stride toward them. They couldn't help but cover their mouths and almost cry out in shock. The female disciple, named Chang'e, pointed at the tent next to Zhang Xiaohua's and decisively said to Oyen, "Manor Lord, the horse is in the tent in front. You and Xiao Tong go over there. We'll go and block this old thief." After speaking, she waved her hand, and the female disciples ran over from Oyen's side. They held long swords and stood between the old man in black and Oyen. Oyen looked at the backs of Chang'e and the others. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. She only bit her lip and quickly walked towards the tent. When the old man saw Chang'e and the others blocking in front of him, he couldn't help but laugh sinisterly. "You girls want to be mantises trying to stop a chariot? Why don't you throw down your long swords, and this old man will let you live? I only want to capture this guy. I'm not interested in the others." Chang'e and the others didn't reply. When they saw the old man walk closer, they pointed their long swords, and several people stabbed at the old man from different angles. But unexpectedly, the old man didn't fight back. He just kept walking forward, allowing the swords to pierce his body. Chang'e and the others were delighted, but then they were shocked. The old man must have something to rely on. Could these murderous swords still work? Sure enough, as the old man did not stop, the long sword stabbed into his body. Chang'e and the others felt that they were not stabbing into a person's flesh, but rather they felt as if they were stabbing into an iron plate. It was hard, and there was a faint ding-dang sound. The long sword immediately bent under everyone's inner strength. The old man was very satisfied with this result. Heh. He shook his arms and used his strength to hit the curved long swords. Kacha. A few of the long swords actually broke from the middle. Moreover, the inner strength in the swords was not exhausted and rushed towards the female disciples' arms. The female disciples were all hit by a heavy object and fell backwards. One of them even vomited blood and fell to the ground. After the other disciples fell to the ground, they immediately jumped up. Their faces were pale, and they held the broken swords in their hands. They couldn't stand steadily. Chang'e's situation was slightly better. Her long sword was not broken. She only stabilized her body and immediately rushed towards the old man. At this time, the old man was already walking towards Oyen. His back was empty, so he rushed towards Chang'e. Chang'e's long sword stabbed towards the old man. However, with such a big back, Chang'e didn't dare to try again. She only used all the strength in her body and stabbed toward the back of the old man's neck. As early as when Chang'e and the other female disciples blocked the old man in black, Xiao Tong supported Oyen and ran towards the hidden horse tent. However, the rain was still heavy and the ground was already very muddy. The ground by the river was uneven, and now it was full of water. How could they see it? They accidentally stepped into a small puddle. When they picked up their feet, they didn't even know where their shoes had gone. But how could they care about that? They just blindly ran forward. Unfortunately, How could two weak women who had never practiced martial arts run far in such a short period of time? Oyen and Xiutong were only halfway there when Changa's sword stabbed the back of the black-clothed old man's neck. At this time, Oyen's feet sank as if she had stepped into a deep pit. Her right leg sank halfway into the pit, and her body instantly lost balance and fell to the right. Xiutong, who was supporting Oyen, was also caught off guard. She used all her strength to pull on Oyen's arm, but not only did she fail to support Oyen, but she also staggered and fell forward. At this time, a cry of surprise came from another tent. Sister Xiutong. A small figure ran from afar and ran towards Oyen and Xiutong, who had fallen to the ground. Wasn't that Zhang Xiaohua who was hiding in the tent? In fact, when he saw Oyen and Xiutong come out of the tent, Zhang Xiaohua wanted to run over. But before he could get up, the old man in black used his qinggong. Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts were not good, but his senses were sharp, and he quickly stopped. Chang'e and the others attacked the old man in black. Zhang Xiaohua also saw it clearly, and his heart turned cold. But when he saw Oyen and Xiutong fall, he couldn't hold it in anymore. He shouted and ran out, wanted to support them to prevent them from falling on the muddy ground. However, Zhang Xiaohua didn't know qinggong. Before he could run out of the tent, Oyen and Xiutong each fell to the muddy ground with a plop. Their clothes were already soaked, and their faces were smeared with black mud. After Oyen fell to the ground, she struggled to stand up. But it seemed that she fell too hard, and for a moment, she couldn't get up. Although Xiutong was covered in mud, she didn't dare to delay and quickly struggled to stand up. As for the sword-wielding Chang'e, when Oyen stepped into the mud, she circulated the qi in her dantian and injected all her strength into the longsword. Steadily, accurately, and viciously, she stabbed it into the back of the black-clothed elder's neck. The black-clothed elder seemed to have eyes on the back of his head. When the longsword filled with inner strength was about to pierce his neck, he suddenly turned around and stared at the tip of the sword that was approaching him. With a ding sound, the longsword stabbed into his palm. It was like stabbing into metal, and sparks almost appeared. Then, the black-clothed elder clenched his fist and grasped the tip of the longsword in his hand. With a little bit of strength, he broke the tip of the sword with a kacha sound. Then, he waved his hand, and the tip of the sword shot towards Chang'e's chest like an arrow. Chang'e was shocked and quickly swung her sword to block it. But it was too late. Chang'e barely managed to tilt her body and dodge the tip of the sword. Unfortunately, the tip of the sword was too fast. Just as Chang'e's body moved, the tip of the sword was in front of her eyes. She only had time to dodge the tip of the sword. With a plop sound, the tip of the sword pierced deeply into Chang'e's left shoulder. A sharp pain came, and Chang'e couldn't help but let out a low growl. The powerful force in the tip of the sword actually caused the injured Chang'e to lose her balance. She took a few steps back, and with a plop sound, she also fell onto the muddy ground. Blood gushed out of her shoulder like a fountain, and Chang'e fainted for a moment. The black-clothed elder stood there without moving. When he saw that Chang'e had fainted, he then walked towards Oyen. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua had already rushed to Oyen's side and was reaching out to help Oyen up from the mud. The black-clothed elder walked slowly, looking at everything in front of him with ridicule. He had already noticed when Zhang Xiaohua rushed out of the tent. However, he saw that Zhang Xiaohua's steps were clumsy and heavy, and didn't even know the basics of lightness skills. Looking at his small figure, he was basically a child who had just started to develop. He only treated him as a manservant in Huanqi manner and naturally didn't take him seriously. He could deal with a disciple of the Misty School like Chang'e with a wave of his hand, not to mention a child. Perhaps he could take Zhang Xiaohua's life with just a finger. When Zhang Xiaohua helped Oyen up from the mud, Xiutong also got up from the ground. When the two of them pulled Oyen forward, one on the left and one on the right, they found that Oyen's right foot was injured and couldn't touch the ground. It must be because of this that Oyen couldn't stand up just now. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua placed Oyen's right hand on his shoulder. He took a step forward and squatted slightly. His left hand took Yan's left hand from Chiu Tong's and placed it on his shoulder. Chiu Tong was stunned and immediately understood. She quickly helped Zhang Xiaohua place Yan on his back. Zhang Xiaohua's body had just started to develop, and he was still half a head shorter than Yan. His thin and weak body looked a little thin on Yan's back. Fortunately, Zhang Xiaohua's arms were strong, and it wasn't very difficult. By the time Chiu Tong placed Yan on Zhang Xiaohua's back, the old man in black had already walked up to them. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, he ran as if he was weightless. However, he didn't run towards the tent, but the small river by the side. Chiu Tong followed behind him. The old man in black watched Zhang Xiaohua and Chiu Tong's movements as if he was watching a play. He didn't disturb them and only frowned when Zhang Xiaohua ran towards the small river. He didn't care if Yan and the others ran towards the tent on horseback. With his qigong, even if Yan was riding a horse, he was confident that he could catch up to her. However, in the current river, due to the rising water level, the riverbed was faster and the water was more turbulent. If Zhang Xiaohua jumped into the water, it would be like a cooked duck flying away. This was something the old man in black would never allow. Just as the old man in black was about to use his qigong to catch up, suddenly, a tall man in black riding a horse arrived at the scene. Then, a loud voice rang out. "Brothers, there are more than 10 fast horses coming from the distance. They are probably reinforcements from the Misty School. Let's cut the Gordian knot quickly." This abnormally loud voice was very familiar to the people in Huanxi Manor. Soon, everyone remembered. Wasn't this the bandit who first appeared in the farce in the forest that day? It wasn't clear whether this guy was reminding his accomplices or encouraging the people in Huanxi Manor. Anyway, after this voice rang out, the people in Huanxi Manor immediately became energetic. On the other hand, the men in black seemed to be a little defeated. The balance that had been maintained for a long time was broken by this guy's voice. However, this instigator didn't have any sense of shame. He clapped his hands, turned his horse around, and rode in the direction he came from. It wasn't clear whether he would continue to explore or escape. The playful look in the old man's eyes immediately disappeared. He thought to himself, "In that case, oh girl, don't blame me for being ruthless." Thinking of this, he immediately quickened his pace and used his qigong to chase after Zhang Xiaohua, who was running in front of him. Not long after, he caught up with Chiu Tong. Seeing that he was about to catch up with Yan, the old man in black didn't increase his speed to pass by Zhang Xiaohua to block his path. Instead, he maintained his speed and secretly circulated his qi. His hands immediately turned pale gold. At this time, Chiu Tong, who was beside him, saw the strange behavior of the old man in black and immediately shouted, "Xiaohua, behind you." Zhang Xiaohua, who was running, was still very sensitive. She had already sensed that something was wrong behind her. When Chiu Tong reminded her, she immediately stopped. At this time, the foundation of her martial arts was revealed. She stood steadily and turned around. However, the old man in black didn't stop. He continued to rush toward Zhang Xiaohua and Yan. His pale gold palm seemed to be about to swing out. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua didn't have time to put Yan on the ground. She just let go of her hands. She didn't care if Yan was standing on the ground or not. She exerted force with her right leg and rushed toward the old man in black. Yan and Chiu Tong both knew how good Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts were. He hadn't even learned a single set of martial arts. He hadn't even learned a single word about the inner strength cultivation method. If he rushed forward like this, it was no different from feeding the tiger with his own body. He was only trying to buy some time for Yan. Yan and Chiu Tong both shouted, "Zhang Xiaohua." They actually sounded like they were about to cry. Actually, when Zhang Xiaohua was running with Yan on her back, she had already thought about it. Although Yan was the manor lord of Huanxi Manor, she usually treated her very well. She had taken good care of him during his time in the manor, just like how Lu Qian cared about him in the past. Not only did she allow He Tianshu to teach him martial arts, she also allowed him to read her treasured books. She even allowed Peng to teach him the inner strength cultivation method. He couldn't repay her for all of these. In this situation, whether it was Lu Qian, Qiu Tong, or Yin, he would stand in front of them without hesitation, even if there was a bottomless abyss in front of him. When Zhang Xiaohua rushed towards the black-clothed old man, he didn't blindly use his body to block the attack. His left hand skillfully took out the toy-like small sword from his chest. His left arm naturally displayed the fifth variation of the sword move that Elder Yu had taught him. A warm current flowed from his left arm and slowly moved forward along his left arm. The small sword also slowly pierced towards the black-clothed old man's throat. The black-clothed old man wasn't surprised to see Zhang Xiaohua turn around. He was somewhat surprised that Zhang Xiaohua had left Yin behind and rushed towards him. However, there was only a trace of mockery on his face. There were many people in this world who had lost their lives for justice. Today, there would be one more. This young man didn't have any martial arts at all. Against him, it was tantamount to a moth flying into a flame. When he saw Zhang Xiaohua take out a toy from his chest, the smile in his eyes became even brighter. How could this kind of child's toy hurt him? He originally wanted to ignore it and let it stab into his body. How could his iron cloth skill, which he had painstakingly trained for decades, be weak? However, he saw this young man stab his sword very steadily. Although the sword was very slow, the angle and timing were very good. The direction of the sword was also his throat. For the sake of caution, the black-clothed old man still raised his left hand and blocked in front of his throat. He was prepared to snatch Zhang Xiaohua's toy, just like he had grabbed Chang'e's longsword. At the same time, the black-clothed old man's figure didn't stop. Instead, he continued to move forward. His right palm turned towards Yin, who was beside Zhang Xiaohua. His goal at this time was no longer to capture Yin. Instead, he wanted to kill her under his pale golden palm. Yin and Qiu Tong had just finished shouting when they saw the black-clothed old man's palm. They immediately understood his intentions and couldn't help but turn pale. Even Chang'e and the other female disciples couldn't stop this Jianghu expert. How could Zhang Xiaohua be his opponent? How could they escape from his evil clutches? Just as they were thinking, Zhang Xiaohua's small edgeless sword had already hit the black-clothed old man's palm. That warm current just happened to flow into the small sword at this time. The sword and palm collided, but there wasn't a dang sound like Chang'e's long sword. It also wasn't as the black-clothed old man imagined that Zhang Xiaohua would be sent flying on the spot. Instead, there was a poochie sound, the sound of flesh being pierced. That small, edgeless sword actually pierced through the palm, filled with internal energy. Moreover, its momentum didn't decrease. The black-clothed old man's heart was greatly shocked. How could he still care about hitting Yin with his pale, golden palm? When the palm was halfway through, it immediately changed direction and hit Zhang Xiaohua's chest. At the same time, he immediately circulated his internal energy to his throat, only to make his throat as hard as a real piece of iron. He waited for the small sword to be deflected with a dang sound. However, something strange happened. Zhang Xiaohua's sword pierced the black-clothed old man's throat. It only paused for a moment. Immediately, like piercing through tofu, there wasn't the slightest bit of resistance as it entered the black-clothed old man's throat. The black-clothed old man was horrified as if he had seen a ghost. His eyes widened and his mouth opened. He couldn't say anything. At this time, his right palm had already struck Zhang Xiaohua's chest. However, following the piercing of Zhang Xiaohua's small sword, the strength in his palm had already lost 40% of its strength. However, how could Zhang Xiaohua withstand just 60% of his strength? Zhang Xiaohua flew out diagonally from the black-clothed old man's palm. She had already fainted in the air. She didn't have time to spit out the blood in her mouth. Even Yin, who was beside her, was affected. She spat out blood from the impact of the black-clothed old man's palm and fell to the ground dispiritedly. As for the black-clothed old man, it was even worse. When his right palm sent Zhang Xiaohua flying, the small sword in his throat was immediately pulled out. Not much blood flowed out from his throat, only a bit of red. However, this bit of red was already enough to take the black-clothed old man's life. His bleeding left hand clutched his throat as he looked in disbelief at Zhang Xiaohua, who was sent flying in the air. His legs went weak, and he fell to the ground. Before he died, his eyes were still open. He really died with a grievance. One sword, just one sword. Zhang Xiaohua killed this nearly invincible black-clothed old man on the spot. Chapter 127. When the black-clothed old man flew into the camp using his qigong, Shernyo, Aunt Qin, and he Tianshu wanted to break away from their opponents and go back to help Oyen. However, the black-clothed man had already figured out their situation. These 3 black-clothed men were specially sent to deal with the 3 people from the Misty School. Their martial arts were also extraordinary. In a hurry, they couldn't get rid of them. However, while everyone was fighting for their lives, they were also anxiously watching the situation at Oyan's side. Chang'e and the other female disciples' resistance, as well as Zhang Xiaohua's appearance, were all seen by the 3 people. However, the black-clothed old man's super strong internal energy and terrifying iron shirt martial arts. Even if Shernyo himself went up, he might not be able to gain an advantage. Therefore, the 3 people, including the disciples of the villa, were all disheartened. They were afraid that today, these people from a villa would be buried here. However, in the end, there was a major change in the situation. The Misty School actually had reinforcements, especially Bandit Jia's loud voice. It reignited the desire to live in Huanxi Villa. The more they fought, the braver they became. On the contrary, the black-clothed men changed their strategy. They fought while retreating, approaching the horses outside the camp. The 3 black-clothed men who were fighting Shernyo and the others also had the intention to retreat. When the black-clothed old man used his qigong to chase after Zhang Xiaohua, they all fainted and left the circle, leaping towards the horses. At this time, if Shernyo and the others wanted to keep these 3 people, it wouldn't be difficult. However, the 3 main forces of the Misty School weren't people who were fond of fighting. Their mission was to protect Oyen. Seeing their opponents retreat, they didn't chase after them and immediately used their qigong to fly towards the black-clothed old man. In their minds, the black-clothed old man didn't immediately make a move at first. Instead, he used his qigong to exhaust their fighting strength. His goal was to capture Oyen alive. Although they were far away from Oyen and definitely wouldn't be able to save her in time, if the 3 of them attacked the black-clothed old man together, they might be able to take Oyen back. Moreover, the reinforcements would be arriving soon. Perhaps it would be an elder from the school. This was Aunt Qin and the rest's wishful thinking. However, when they were still halfway there, they heard Qiutong shout. Only then did they notice the black-robed elder's pale golden palm. The 3 of them were greatly alarmed. How was this elder going to capture Oyen alive? He was clearly going to take her life. Thus, the 3's footsteps quickened. However, how could they cross such a distance in an instant? They could only helplessly watch as a tragedy unfolded. However, they had guessed the beginning of the story, but not the end. Until the black-clothed with Qiutong, they didn't know what had happened. They didn't know what had happened. They didn't understand, but they didn't know they worse with O. By the time the 3 arrived at the scene, everything was over. Aunt Qin rushed forward to check on Oyan's injuries with Qiutong. Shernyo carefully walked in front of the black-clothed old man. He looked at his corpse from afar to confirm whether he was really dead. He Tianshu, on the other hand, looked in the direction Zhang Xiaohua had been sent flying to find Zhang Xiaohua. At this time, the group of black-clothed men who were still alive had already returned to their horses. They all mounted their horses. The people from Huanxi Manor didn't chase after them. They only held their weapons and stood in front of the campsite. The rain continued to fall. The sound of the rain couldn't cover the sound of horse hooves approaching. The 3 leaders who disguised themselves as robbers had all seen the black-clothed old man die. Although they didn't know what had happened, it was a fact that he was dead. It was very unrealistic for them to take Oyan's life with just a few of them, not to mention the Misty School's reinforcements that were about to arrive. Thus, the first leader thought for a moment. He waved his hand and gestured. He took the lead and galloped in another direction. The remaining black-clothed men ignored the corpses in the campsite and followed him. The people who were standing outside the campsite with swords and sabers couldn't help but cheer when they saw the black-clothed men leave. There were even a few people who relaxed and fell to the ground, throwing their swords and sabers to the side. At the same time, the sound of horse hooves in the distance finally came closer. The person on the horse saw the tent in the campsite and quickly shouted, "Are you the brothers from the Misty School? Wasn't that the voice of Lan Dong, who they saw a few days ago?" A disciple who recognized Lan Dong also quickly responded, "Brother Lan, you're finally here. It's us." When Lan Dong heard the response, half of the stone in his heart was lifted. He swung the stirrups and dismounted. Seeing the sorry state of the people, his heart tightened again. He quickly asked, "Where's Manor Lord O?" Everyone pointed to Oyan's location. Lan Dong immediately rushed over, ignoring the mud on the ground. When Lan Dong arrived, Aunt Chin had already taken Oyan's pulse. Lan Dong saw that Oyan's eyes were closed and her face was pale. He anxiously asked, "How is Manor Lord's injury?" Aunt Chin frowned and said, "Her life should be fine. It's just that Manor Lord's body is weak to begin with. Now that she was injured by that old thief, her internal injuries are not light. She will need a long time to recover." Hearing this, Lan Dong's uneasy heart finally settled back into his stomach. At this time, the stone cow also walked over. Aunt Chin asked doubtfully, "Is that old thief dead?" The corner of the stone cow's mouth curled up. He said, "Yes, he's dead." A sword pierced through his throat. He couldn't be more dead. Yes, he died with his eyes wide open. Then he asked, "How is Manor Lord?" Aunt Chin smiled and said, "It's all thanks to Zhang Xiaohua blocking the palm from Manor Lord." The last palm was also aimed at Zhang Xiaohua. Manor Lord was only affected by it. "It's no big deal. She'll probably wake up tomorrow." The stone cow was surprised. "She'll only wake up tomorrow? This isn't serious?" Aunt Chin said, "Isn't this much better than what we expected?" The stone cow also nodded and said, "That's right. It's all thanks to Zhang Xiaohua." Zhang Xiaohua? Lan Dong was puzzled. How come he had never heard of this name? From the sound of it, her martial arts must be very strong. However, there didn't seem to be this name among the martial uncles. Could it be an elder of the sect? Could it be that the elder had already arrived before him? That was impossible. He had rushed here from the town without stopping to rest. How could that elder fly here? Just as Lan Dong was surprised, Tianshu dragged his heavy steps out of the darkness and rushed over. As he ran, he shouted, "Zhang Xiaohua is missing. She probably fell into the river. Quickly find a brother who knows how to swim and look for her in the river." What? Zhang Xiaohua fell into the river. Aunt Chin, the stone cow, and Xiao Tong all cried out in alarm. Oyan was already seriously injured after being hit by the black-clothed elder's palm. That Zhang Xiaohua was hit in the chest by the pale golden palm. What kind of injury was that? With this kind of injury and falling into the rushing river, Zhang Xiaohua, could he still thinking of this? No one dared to think any further. Aunt Chin quickly said, "Shernyo, find a brother who knows how to swim and quickly search the surroundings. Lan Dong, send a group of accompanying brothers to ride along the river. See if there's anything along the way or in the river." Shernyo and Lan Dong received the order and stood up. However, Lan Dong only took 2 steps before turning back and asking, "Hall Master Chin, what does this Zhang Xiaohua look like?" Only then did Aunt Chin remember. How did Lan Dong know about Zhang Xiaohua? She quickly said apologetically, "She's just a 12 or 13-year-old child. She's seriously injured. You'll know once you see her." 12 or 13-year-old child. Lan Dong felt a wave of dizziness and wondered if Aunt Chin was wrong. Eldest sister Chin saw that Lan Dong was stunned and frowned. "She's just a teenager. Why aren't you going to look for her?" "Oh, okay. We'll send people." Lan Dong seemed to wake up from a dream and quickly got up to assign people. Only then did An and Xiao Tong carefully carry the unconscious Yin back to the tent. The heavy rain poured down, and the night was as dark as ink. Between heaven and earth, there was endless darkness. It was already past midnight, but Huanxi Manor's camp was still noisy. They had just been attacked, and no one could guarantee that the enemy wouldn't come back again. Landong only brought a dozen or so disciples, and they were all ordinary disciples with average martial arts skills. The black-clothed men had hurriedly retreated because Landong's arrival had broken their advantage in strength. They didn't know how many people the Misty School had. More importantly, the black-clothed old man who was in charge of the situation was the most likely person to capture Yin. However, he was killed by an inconspicuous youth. This disrupted the plan they had been planning for many days, and they had no choice but to retreat. If they had figured out the Misty School's current strength, they might not have returned immediately. Therefore, other than the injured disciples who had returned to their tents to rest, the other disciples' hearts were still beating fast, and they were on high alert. Although Huanxi Manor's camp was near the river, and it was already very unsafe, in this dark night, the enemy might still be spying on them. Many factors determined that they couldn't move rashly for the time being. They could only wait for the sky to brighten before making any plans. For the same reason, there weren't many disciples who went to look for Zhang Xiaohua. In fact, all the disciples in the camp already knew what had just happened. They also knew that Zhang Xiaohua had not only saved Yin, but also everyone in the camp. The black-clothed old man's martial arts skills were obvious to all. Even if Landong and the rest came to the rescue in time, the dozen or so of them were far from being a match for the black-clothed old man. Everyone's fate was inevitably the same as Yan's, and they were all killed by the old man's palm. They knew that Zhang Xiaohua was hit in the chest by the black-clothed old man's pale golden palm, and they already knew that he was most likely killed on the spot. Even if he still had a breath left, his severely injured body was swept into the river, and even if there was only a little bit of life left, it would be extinguished. They were also willing to go to the river and follow the river to look for Zhang Xiaohua. However, the river was turbulent, and they didn't know where he had been washed away. Moreover, the sky was dark, and it was raining heavily. The torches were extinguished, so where could they find the light to look for him? Although He Tianshu's men and those who rowed down the river were anxious, they also knew that they were doing their best and leaving the rest to fate. At the beginning, He Tianshu still shouted a few times with a loud voice, and several disciples also followed suit. But suddenly, He Tianshu seemed to have realized something, and he shut his mouth and stopped shouting. At the same time, he also stopped the others from shouting. The disciples were very puzzled at first, and wanted to ask the reason, but when they saw He Tianshu's tense face, they didn't dare to ask more. After thinking about it carefully, they couldn't help but secretly admire He Tianshu. He was really worthy of being a captain. When they shouted like this, didn't they let the black-robed men know their whereabouts? Captain, he was really meticulous. He Tianshu didn't know that his position in the hearts of others had suddenly risen by a lot. He only thought about it blindly. Sigh, it's already past midnight. The disciples who went down the river to look for Zhang Xiaohua couldn't see far in the dark. Moreover, the safety of the campsite was more important. Therefore, they soon returned. When He Tianshu saw that they had returned, he stopped searching and called for those who were searching in the river and nearby to return to the campsite together. His heart was filled with sadness. When He Tianshu returned to the tent in the center of the campsite, Aunt Chin and Xiao Tong hurriedly came up to him with eager faces. They asked, "Did you find him?" He Tianshu shook his head silently. Xiao Tong's tears flowed down with a whoosh. She gritted her teeth tightly. Aunt Chin also muttered, "Poor child." Everyone was silent. After a while, He Tianshu asked, "Is the village lord all right?" Aunt Chin nodded and said, "He's all right. There aren't any changes. We can only know the specific situation when the doctor sees him tomorrow morning." He Tianshu said, "It's Zhang Xiaohua's wish that the village lord is fine. I'll go stand guard outside first. If the black-clothed man comes back, it'll be troublesome." He Tianshu was about to leave when the stone cow came in from outside. Seeing He Tianshu, he asked, "You still haven't found him?" He Tianshu said no. The stone cow sighed and turned to Aunt Chin. "I've already checked that old thief." Aunt Chin and He Tianshu's eyes lit up. They asked in unison, "Who is it?" The stone cow shook his head and said, "This person has old injuries on his face. His face has long been disfigured. I can't tell who he is. The light golden palm and iron shirt aren't high-level martial arts. There are at least 100 people in Jianghu who have reached his level. It's not easy to find him." Aunt Chin nodded and said, "What about the other corpses? Did you find any clues?" The stone cow shook his head again and said, "These people have all gone through strict training. They all wore ordinary night clothes and didn't carry anything. Their weapons were also common in Jianghu. It's hard to find anything." Aunt Chin thought for a moment and said, "No matter. Keep these corpses and weapons well and bring them back to Misty Mountain Villa. If we can't identify them, the experts in the sect will do it. Leave this matter to them." The stone cow agreed and was about to leave. At this moment, Aunt Chin called out to him and asked, "How did that old thief die?" Hearing this question, He Tianshu looked at the stone cow anxiously, wanting to know the answer. The stone cow's expression was strange and said, "There were 2 wounds on that old thief's body. One was his left palm, which seemed to have been pierced by something. The other was his throat, which seemed to have been pierced by a sword. I don't know how Zhang Xiaohua did it. At that time, the sky was dark and I couldn't see clearly. What about you?" Aunt Chin shook her head. "What a joke. The sky was so dark and it was raining. Although one could see things in the dark when one's internal energy was strong, she hadn't reached that level yet." When the stone cow heard this, he smiled bitterly and said, "Then it can only be a mystery. This Zhang Xiaohua probably didn't have much luck." Alas, this fellow was frank and outspoken. His words made everyone feel sad. At this moment, He Tianshu suddenly asked, "Brother Sure, were the wounds on that old thief's hand similar to those of a long sword, just narrower than a normal long sword?" The stone cow was stunned and didn't understand why he asked this. He nodded and said, "Yes." He Tianshu's eyes lit up and asked again, "Then were the wounds on his throat also smaller than those of a normal longsword?" The stone cow seemed to understand this point and said, "Yes, brother He, you're right." "Then what kind of weapon did these old thieves use to kill them?" He Tianshu smiled bitterly and told them about the toy sword that Zhang Xiaohua was given to him when he bought the long sword. It was fine if he didn't talk about it, but after he talked about it, everyone was even more confused. That toy sword had no tip, so how could it pierce through the old man's throat? How could it pierce through the old man's palm? Don't forget, the old man practiced the light golden palm and the iron shirt. Even the sword of a female disciple, like Chang'e, couldn't pierce through the old man's body. How did Zhang Xiaohua do it? This was really a mystery. The sky finally brightened, but the rain didn't show any signs of stopping. Under the watchful eyes of the Misty School's disciples, the black-clothed man didn't return. Everyone couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. That unbearable and unforgettable night was finally over. Oyen was still unconscious, but judging from her pulse, it was still very stable. This was considered a blessing in disguise. Since the village head was unconscious, Aunt Chin was naturally in charge of everything. They couldn't stay in this campsite any longer, and with Oyen's condition, it was probably impossible for them to go south. Moreover, there were still unknown black-clothed men hiding nearby. Even if Oyen was fine, Openg, who was far away in Pingyang City, would definitely not agree to let Oyen go there again. Hence, when the sky was slightly brighter, Aunt Chin gave the order to pack up the campsite and return quickly. Naturally, they couldn't take the old route on the way back. Aunt Chin followed Lan Dong's instructions and went on the nearby official road. She redrew the route back to Pingyang City. She would rather take a long detour than take the small roads. She would rather travel slowly and stay in a town for the night. Furthermore, Lan Dong quickly reported the robbery to the higher-ups and requested for more people to come and assist them. When Oyen woke up, it was already afternoon. The first thing she did when she woke up was to ask about Zhang Xiaohua's situation. After listening to Aunt Chin's explanation, she felt dejected. Everyone's decision wasn't wrong, and it wasn't realistic to send people to look for him now. It would be better to wait until they met up with the people from the Misty School. As for Aunt Chin's decision to return to Pingyang City, Yin didn't have much objection. Openg originally didn't agree to her coming out this time. She had coaxed and pestered him to let her go. She thought that she was just a village head and didn't have any grudges in the pugilistic world. What danger could she possibly be in? However, the cruel reality told her that humans were harmless, but tigers hurt people. Anyone who survived in the pugilistic world couldn't forget this cruel rule at any time. However, no matter how hard Yin racked her brains, she couldn't remember who exactly she had offended. Please add it to your collection. Thank you. Chapter 128. Oyan's caravan traveled for a few more days. Although the sect's elders hadn't arrived yet, elite disciples from the Lotus Escort Agency and Misty School strongholds in the surrounding towns had arrived. Oyan's safety could be considered guaranteed. After that, Aunt Chin issued an order for the nearby sect's disciples to follow the river and search for Zhang Xiaohua's body. There would be a great reward if they found it. Thus, other than the disciples who had a mission, everyone else followed the river to search. However, until the seventh day, when Li Jian, Li Laoer, Lu Qingyang, and Lu Lao rushed over from Pingyang City and received Oyan's carriage, there was still no news from Zhang Xiaohua. Was Zhang Xiaohua dead or alive? On that day, that night, and that moment, Zhang Xiaohua was struck in the chest by the black-clothed elder and immediately fainted. Her body was sent flying and fell diagonally towards the river. Zhang Xiaohua was originally running towards the river with Oyan on her back. The place where they exchanged blows wasn't far from the river. Zhang Xiaohua's body was small, and the black-clothed elder's palm strength was vigorous. Although this palm strike couldn't directly send Zhang Xiaohua into the river, only half of her chest was left on the riverbank. At that time, the river was so turbulent. In less than a moment, the river water rushed towards Zhang Xiaohua's legs and dragged her into the river. By the time Tianshu searched for her, Zhang Xiaohua had already been washed far away. Speaking of which, Zhang Xiaohua was lucky. If the black-clothed elder's palm strength had increased by just a bit, Zhang Xiaohua would have directly fallen into the river with a plop. Then, she would have sunk and been washed away. On the other hand, Zhang Xiaohua's legs entered the water first. Her upper body was dragged into the water, but her head was above water. Otherwise, even if she wasn't beaten to death by the black-clothed elder, the river water would have drowned her. The unconscious Zhang Xiaohua's body was extremely relaxed. Thus, it was very easy for her to float on the river. At this time, it was already midnight. The unconscious Zhang Xiaohua was once again in a flickering dream. However, it was unknown if he could see it. In the darkness, Zhang Xiaohua floated in the water and flowed down 3,000 feet with the current. However, this Zhang Xiaohua's drifting was different from others. Generally, when someone fell into the water, they would first float for a period of time. They would either sink into the water or reach the shore and be stranded there. This was what Aunt Chin and the others had imagined. Thus, they had the disciples search along the river. However, this Zhang Xiaohua was different. It was unknown whether it was because she was still small, or because her body was light, or because she was having a flickering dream. Her small body seemed to be weightless as she floated in the river. The small sword she held tightly in her left hand also seemed to have lost its usual weight. Zhang Xiaohua's body was like a floating wooden board. She was as fast as the current. Thus, when Tianshu sent people to search for her the second time, Zhang Xiaohua had already been washed to an unimaginable distance. Later, the people Tianshu sent only found a distance that they thought was far based on their experience. However, this far was something that Zhang Xiaohua had already surpassed. At daybreak, the rain still hadn't stopped. The river became even more turbulent. Zhang Xiaohua floated on the river like this for an unknown distance. When it was almost evening, Zhang Xiaohua finally floated to a roundabout bend in the river. It was unknown how far this place was from the place where Zhang Xiaohua had fallen into the water. Beside the river bend was a simple straw hut surrounded by a few fences. In the open space of the straw hut, there was a wooden frame that extended into the river. At this moment, there was a girl about 10 years old sitting there, holding a fishing rod in one hand and propping up her cheek with the other. Her eyes were listless as she stared ahead. The girl was wearing a light yellow dress and was very neat. Her long black hair was tied up from the top of her head with a handkerchief and casually scattered behind her head. The girl's face was like a duck's egg. Her eyes were big and there were small eye bags. Her skin was fair. There was a dark red beauty mark at the corner of her mouth. This girl wasn't extremely beautiful, but her clear black and white eyes and slightly raised eyebrows showed her imposing temperament without a doubt. At the girl's age, it wasn't the season of spring yet, so why was she frowning? At this moment, the fishing rod in the girl's hand seemed to have caught a big fish and slipped out. The girl didn't seem to have noticed. Suddenly, a loving voice came from the straw hut. "Silly child, if you're distracted again, not only will you not catch the fish, your fishing rod will also be stolen by the fish." Only then did the girl wake up from her dream. She quickly grabbed the fishing rod that was about to slip out of her hand. When she raised her eyes to look into the river, she couldn't help but exclaim, "Abyss, it's a dead person." "Eh." The person in the house exclaimed and walked out. It was a kind-looking old woman in her 50s. She wore extremely clean, moon-white clothes, and there was a long sword hanging from her waist. The old woman quickly walked to the front of the frame. When she looked carefully at the end of the fishing rod, on the hook, wasn't it the unconscious Zhang Xiaohua? The girl looked at Zhang Xiaohua's corpse and sadly said, "Poor child, he probably fell into the water like me. His family must be very sad if they can't find him." As she spoke, she seemed to have touched something in her heart. The worry on her face became more obvious. The abbess looked at the corpse in the water and said, "Then let's fish him out. Although we don't know where he fell into the water, it rained heavily last night, and the river has risen a lot. It won't be easy to find where he came from. Why don't we bury him here, so that he won't be soaked in the water and become food for the fishes and turtles?" The girl's miserable expression didn't lessen. She only nodded and used her strength to pull the fishing rod back. When Zhang Xiaohua was pulled to the shore, the abbess walked closer and didn't avoid anything. She stretched out her hand to pull Zhang Xiaohua's arm. Fortunately, the frame on the water wasn't very high and the water had risen a lot today. The abbess leaned forward slightly and grabbed onto Zhang Xiaohua's arm. The abbess grabbed onto Zhang Xiaohua's arm and was about to use her internal energy to pull him to the shore. Suddenly, she looked happy and shouted, "He's still alive." When the girl heard this, she was also very happy. She quickly came over to help. However, she was small and weak. What would she do to help? Moreover, Zhang Xiaohua's body wasn't heavy. The abbess only used one hand to pull him out of the river. She was just more careful than before. When the abbess saw that the girl wanted to help, she smiled and said, "Go boil some water and make some ginger soup. This child has been in the water for who knows how long. He must be cold. Drink some ginger soup to dispel the cold." When the little girl heard this, she skipped and ran away. The worry between her eyebrows seemed to have lessened a little. When the abbess carried Zhang Xiaohua to the straw hut, she changed his wet clothes and wrapped him in a thick quilt. Then, she carefully checked his pulse and used her internal energy to check his body. Her expression became even more serious. At this time, she saw that Zhang Xiaohua's left hand was tightly holding onto the small sword. She tried to pull it out with her hand, but it didn't budge. She then put Zhang Xiaohua's left hand and the small sword in his hand into the quilt. When the girl walked into the straw hut with the bowl, the abbess was still frowning. She seemed to be thinking about something. The girl carefully asked, "Abbess, what happened to him? Can he still be saved?" When the abbess saw that the girl was worried, she smiled and said, "He didn't fall into the water for no reason. He suffered a very serious internal injury and was thrown into the river by someone." When the girl heard this, she became even sadder and said, "He's about the same age as me. Who could he have offended? It must be a bad person who caused him to be like this." "Abbess, aren't you a martial arts expert? You must save him." Hearing the girl's words, the abbess couldn't help but feel ashamed. She had been in the martial arts world for too long. Her considerations were too complicated. Just now, she was actually thinking whether this youth was a bad person. She couldn't see it clearly as a little girl. How could a teenager be a bad person? Since this was the case, how could she not save him? Thus, the abbess ordered the girl to go out and put a wooden basin in front of the Kong. Then, she helped Zhang Xiaohua up and put him in a meditative position. Then, she sat behind Zhang Xiaohua and put her palms on his back. She then used her sex's unique healing method to help Zhang Xiaohua heal the injury from the light golden palm. Not long after, Zhang Xiaohua's face gradually became rosy, and there was a faint steam rising from his head. The abbess' right palm pulled out and immediately Zhang Xiaohua's back. Then, she used more strength, and with a pa sound, she slapped his shoulder. Zhang Xiaohua's mouth opened, and he spat out a few mouthfuls of blood into the wooden basin. Most of the blood was black and had already solidified. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua spit out the blood clots, the abbess let out a long breath. She withdrew her palms and carefully laid Zhang Xiaohua flat on the Kong. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua's face was slightly rosy, and his breathing was also slightly stable. His forehead was covered in sweat, and there were signs that he was alive. The girl quickly took the wooden basin out and poured the dirty blood into the river. When she returned to the house, she carefully asked, "Abbess, is he cured just like that?" The abbess smiled and said, "How can it be that simple? I only forced out the clogged blood. He has never practiced internal energy, and his meridians are still blocked. Using internal energy to treat him won't be very effective. Only medicinal stones are the best way to treat him. That's the skill of a doctor, and I can't do it. But where can we find a doctor in the wilderness? The nearest town is a day's journey away, and he'll have to use his qigong to get there. How can he withstand the bumpy journey with his injuries? I'm afraid he'll lose his life before he reaches town." The girl frowned and said, "Then what should we do?" The abbess continued, "I don't know which bastard injured this child, but the attack was very vicious. All the organs in his body have been displaced. If the injury to his heart was even a little heavier, he would have died long ago. However, he was probably thrown into the river. During this period of floating in the water, it was like sleeping on a Kong bed. The organs in his body were not damaged and are already recovering slightly. I still have a few good healing pills here. I'll give it to him in a while and see the effects. Now, the only thing we can do is to rest quietly and see how his luck is." The girl seemed to understand and nodded slightly. She looked at the ginger soup that had already turned cold and said, "Should I still feed it to him?" The abbess smiled and said, "That won't do. Just now, he thought he slipped and fell into the water. The ginger soup can dispel the cold, but now he has internal injuries. This ginger soup is something that stimulates the body. If we let him drink it, won't he die? You'd better change it to some plain water and feed him some pills later." The girl obeyed and went to get some plain water. The abbess took out a white porcelain bottle and carefully opened it. She poured out a thumb-sized black pill from the bottle and then pried open Zhang Xiaohua's teeth. She stuffed the pill into his mouth and washed it down with plain water. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua still had the consciousness to swallow, the abbess became more confident. Zhang Xiaohua's arrival did not affect the abbess and the girls' lives too much. The abbess still went out in the morning and came back in the evening. She would only check on Zhang Xiaohua's condition at night and feed him a pill. The girl would stay in a straw hut and either stare blankly or wander around aimlessly. Most of the time, she would sit by the river with a fishing rod and fish with a lot on her mind. Only the river was turbulent every day. She did not know where it rained. However, nothing else appeared in the river, and she did not catch any fish. A few days passed like this, and the weather became colder. It was almost winter, and the girl could not stand the cold. She already wanted to start a stove in the straw hut. The abbess's originally calm mood started to become irritated. Her brows would frown from time to time. She seemed to have encountered a huge problem. The girl seemed to have noticed the abbess's abnormal mood. She really wanted to ask, but did not know how to start. That night, After the abbess fed the last pill to Zhang Xiaohua, the girl asked, "Abbess, your pills are gone. How are you going to feed him tomorrow?" The abbess took Zhang Xiaohua's pulse and sent a wave of internal energy into his body to check. She said, "There are only so many pills. If there is an effect, then it is enough. If there is no effect, then it is useless no matter how many pills there are." The girl was a little worried and said, "Then how is he now? Is there any effect? Don't let our Baba fish him up and bury him. That would not be worth it." The abbess smiled and said, "Saving people is the process. There is no guarantee that there will be an outcome. With a merciful heart, it is enough. However, you don't have to worry. This child recovered very quickly. It is beyond my expectations. His life should not be in danger. I just don't know why he has not woken up. If this goes on, it will not work. I still have to return to the sect before the end of the year. You also have to go with me. I cannot leave you in the deep mountains. But if he still does not wake up, do we have to take him with us?" The girl smiled and said, "Then let's take him with us. If you take me in, then I will take in another." The abbess patted her little head and said, "You make it sound so easy. My sect has always taken in women and not men. Even if there are male disciples, they are mostly outer sect disciples. Moreover, I have never thought of taking in a male disciple." The girl spread out her hands and said, "Then we can only take him with us. We will send him to the nearest town and let him fend for himself." The abbess said, "Don't try to provoke me. Let's not talk about sending him to the town first. If he fends for himself, with his situation, once he reaches the town, he will self-destruct." The girl blinked and said, "Then, maybe he'll be fine before you finish your task." The abbess smiled and said, "There is no maybe. When I looked for that place, it was already." At this point, she suddenly realized something and smiled bitterly, saying, "You little girl, if you want to ask, just say it. Why are you beating around the bush? However, this matter involves a lot of things. I cannot let you know for now. Even if others ask, you can't say anything more, understand?" The girl said disapprovingly, "I understand, abbess. I will keep your secret." The abbess knew that she did not take it to heart, but did not point it out. She continued, "It seems that my task will not be completed this time. However, I have long been mentally prepared. I will continue to do it in the future. Let's wait a few more days. Looking at the time, we can still make it back to the mountain." The girl pouted and said, "I will listen to you, abbess. I have nowhere to go anyway." The abbess patted her head and said lovingly, "It's okay. You will have a place to go in the future." 2 days later, in the wee hours of this day, when a morning sun shone brightly, Zhang Xiaohua, who had been unconscious on the bed of the straw hut, suddenly opened his eyes. In his black eyes, a ball of light flashed and disappeared. Zhang Xiaohua, who had just woken up, looked at the unfamiliar cottage in front of him and felt very strange. However, after thinking for a while, he roughly knew how he felt. He tried to turn over and sit up, but when he lifted his chest slightly, he immediately felt an unbearable pain in his chest. He could not help but groan and lie back down on the bed. Thus, he turned his head and looked around. He opened his mouth and wanted to call for someone, but just as he was about to speak, his chest also hurt. He could not shout loudly and could only call out softly, "Is there anyone?" His voice was very weak, like a cat's meow. Who could hear it? Luckily, Zhang Xiaohua could still move his arm. Just as he wanted to move, he realized that his left hand was still tightly holding onto the small sword. Zhang Xiaohua sighed with emotion as he held the small sword in front of his eyes with difficulty. Looking at the familiar toy, he once again had doubts in his heart. What exactly was this? Was it really a toy? Normally, when practicing sword moves, it would be understandable to stab into a tree or a rock. However, the martial arts of the old man in black was something that even the disciples of the ethereal sect could not stab into his body with a long sword. For this small sword to be able to stab into his body so easily, it was really inconceivable. Moreover, this small sword was not sharpened. Zhang Xiaohua was thinking when he suddenly heard a clear voice. "You are awake?" Zhang Xiaohua turned his head to look. There was a little girl standing at the door with a figure similar to his. Her face was like a duck's egg, and it was a little red from the cold. Her big eyes were flashing with a trace of surprise, and she was holding a fishing rod in her hand. Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. Was this the child of a fisherman? She went fishing early in the morning to make a living. However, she did not look too beautiful, but the temperament between her eyebrows could not lie. What kind of fisherman's child would be so imposing? Sure enough, the girl quickly put down the fishing rod and shouted, "Wait here. I'll tell the master now." After saying that, she turned around and ran out. Her black hair fluttered, leaving behind a beautiful scenery. Not long after, the master quickly walked over and said happily, "God bless, you finally woke up in time. Let me take a look first." After saying that, she walked to Zhang Xiaohua's Kong and took his pulse. Then, she transferred a strand of true qi into Zhang Xiaohua's body and said, "Not bad, child. You have recovered very well. In these 10 days, you were actually able to recover half of your injuries. Your body is really not ordinary. You are full of vitality. Sai, it's good to be young. You can recover so quickly from your injuries." Chapter 129. Hearing that she had been unconscious for more than 10 days, Zhang Xiaohua cursed in her heart. The attack on the rainy night was still vivid in her mind. She didn't know how Yin and the others were doing. That old man in black was probably killed by her, but were the people who came later really the Misty School's reinforcements? If Yin and the others were out of danger, they must be looking for her. More than 10 days had passed. Who knew where they had found her? She wanted to ask the mistress where she was, but she didn't even know where she had fallen into the water. She also didn't know how far she had drifted along the river. What was the point of asking? Thus, Zhang Xiaohua could only force herself to stay awake. She looked at the mistress and said softly, "Thank you, mistress, for saving my life." The mistress touched her forehead and said with a smile, "This child is really sensible. If you want to talk about saving your life, you have to thank this girl first. If it wasn't for her fishing you out, who knows where you would be drifting now?" "Fishing me out?" Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. She immediately remembered that she saw the little girl holding the fishing rod and immediately understood. She looked at the little girl beside her with gratitude and said softly, "Then I still have to thank Miss for saving my life." The little girl smiled faintly and said, "You're welcome. I only saw you. Fishing you out and feeding you medicine were all due to the mistress. I don't dare to take the credit." Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, "No matter what, I still have to thank the mistress and miss for their kindness." The mistress saw that Zhang Xiaohua was a bit tired and said, "All right, since you're awake, take your time to recuperate. We can talk about these things later. Sleep for a while first." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he nodded his head slightly. He had only said a few words when he felt that his body was drained of energy. He just wanted to sleep. When he heard the abbess's instructions, he quietly closed his eyes and fell asleep not long after. When Zhang Xiaohua woke up again, it was already evening. With the little girl's help, Zhang Xiaohua struggled to eat something. Only then did she regain some energy. Not long after, the mistress also returned. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua had woken up and was in good spirits, she was also full of joy. The mistress helped Zhang Xiaohua sit up and put the quilt behind his back. Then she put him on the quilt, and the three of them began to talk. Naturally, the mistress asked about Zhang Xiaohua's origin. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, "Mistress, my name is Zhang Xiaohua. I work in a Chinese medicine field in a mountain villa. This time, I went to the south with the owner of the villa to do something. On the way, we were attacked by bandits at night. I was beaten by an old man in black and fell into the river. As for the exact location of the villa and the owner's name, when I left the villa, someone specially told me not to reveal my whereabouts. I don't know their exact whereabouts now, but I think it's best to keep my promise and not tell you. What do you think?" In fact, the mistress didn't mean to get to the bottom of it. She was just asking. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua kept his promise, she was happy in her heart. She had been in the Jianghu for so many years, and it was rare to see such a simple child. Of course, the mistress didn't mean to make things difficult for Zhang Xiaohua. Just as the mistress was about to speak, the little girl next to her laughed out loud and said, Xiaohua, your name sounds nice. Why does it sound like a girl's name? Xiaohua, Xiaohua. It reminds me of the little white flower on the top of the mountain. This was the second time that Zhang Xiaohua heard others say that his name was funny. However, seeing the little girl's flower-like smile, he didn't have any bad feelings. He only said weakly, I don't think there's anything wrong with the name my parents gave me. Then what's your name? This was a very ordinary sentence, but in the little girl's ears, it was like a thunderbolt. The little girl's face turned pale. She bit her lips and held back her tears. Under the mistress's pitiful gaze, she said, I don't know what my name is. I seem to have forgotten everything, but at the same time, I remember everything. But I just can't remember. My previous life seemed to be a dream. I can't explain it clearly. The mistress sighed and said, I met her some time ago in the barren mountains. At that time, she was also unconscious. When she woke up, she had forgotten everything. She didn't even know her name. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, Mistress is really a good person. You saved me and this little girl in a row. Your merit is boundless. That's right, little girl. Since you were in a dream before, now that you've woken up, you have a new life. You should be happy. If you don't have a name, you can give a new one. I think no matter if it's in a dream or not, you only need to keep your true self. How about I call you Ming? When the little girl heard this, her eyes lit up. She smiled and said, Ming, that's right. All living things are dreams. I'm no exception. From now on, I'll be called Ming. Hee hee. Thank you, Zhang Xiaohua. The mistress clapped her hands and said, That's right. Zhang Xiaohua, you look like a scholar. How come you're a farmer? Zhang Xiaohua said embarrassedly, My family was poor since I was young. When I was young, I wasn't smart. My father didn't let me study much. During this time, I read a lot of books, so I know some things. Little Meng saved me, so giving me a name can be considered as forming a good karma. Then, Zhang Xiaohua said embarrassedly, I still haven't asked for Shirtai's name. I'll remember it in my heart and repay you in the future. The Shirtai said with a smile, Actually, you're not a person of Jianghu, so there's no harm in me telling you. However, for some reason, you only need to remember that my name is Jing Xian, and during this time, it's best to remember it in your heart and not tell others. Zhang Xiaohua said solemnly, I know, Shirtai, everyone has their own privacy and secrets. We should all give each other some space. I'm already happy that Shirtai doesn't blame me. I'll treat Shirtai's matter as normal. Shirtai said with a smile. Zhang Xiaohua's words are reasonable. Everyone knows that taking a step back makes the world better. But how many people understand? If they really understand, how much less bloody can there be in Jianghu? It's a pity that Jianghu is a place where fists matter. When your fists are hard, you'll have reason and won't care about other people's privacy and secrets. Zhang Xiaohua, I hope that when you grow up in the future, you can remember what you said today and do what you said. Zhang Xiaohua bowed and said, I know, Shirtai. I'll try my best to do it. The three of them talked for a while. Shirtai saw that Zhang Xiaohua was tired, so she let him rest and pulled Xiaoming out. In the next few days, Shirtai still went out early and came back late. Zhang Xiaohua's injury also recovered rapidly. Shirtai was very surprised by this situation. She had personally checked Zhang Xiaohua's injury. It was serious and abnormal. According to her idea, it would take at least a few months of rest. So she had been thinking about how to deal with this matter. Now it seemed that Zhang Xiaohua's recovery in these 10 days was comparable to others' recovery in 1 or 2 months. Was it really because her pill was effective, or was it because Zhang Xiaohua was young and easy to recover? Looking at Shirtai's surprised eyes, Zhang Xiaohua also thought of her elder brother's injury that day. Didn't Zhang Xiaolong's internal injury recover very quickly last year? At that time, everyone thought that it was because of the spring water at home. She had been out for almost a year and had not drunk the spring water for a long time. Was it because she had drunk the spring water before? The spring water could cure internal injuries. This kind of thing was just thinking about. If she said it out loud, she would be said to have a brain problem for no reason. So Zhang Xiaohua could only keep her mouth shut. In fact, The reason why Zhang Xiaohua had been in a coma for more than 10 days was naturally because her body had automatically healed her injury. The longer she was in a coma, the better the recovery. Now that she had woken up, her injury was of course recovering rapidly. Zhang Xiaohua did not know this, and neither did Shirtai. However, it did not matter whether she knew or not. After all, Zhang Xiaohua was getting better day by day. On this day, Zhang Xiaohua and Xiaoming were still in the cottage. Zhang Xiaohua could already walk on the ground. She slowly moved to the door of the cottage. Outside the door was the warm sunshine, which made Zhang Xiaohua feel warm. Xiaoming did not go fishing. She threw the fishing rod aside and also sat down barefoot. She asked Zhang Xiaohua, "Brother Xiaohua, where is your home? Who is in your family? Can you tell me? I will definitely keep a secret for you. I won't tell anyone." Zhang Xiaohua looked at Xiaoming's face in the sunshine and smiled. She said, "This, you can tell me. There's no need to keep a secret. My family lives in Guizhuang House, a small village in Lu Town. However, don't ask me where Lu Town is. I have never seen a map, so I can't tell you clearly. My family now has my father and mother, as well as my elder brother and sister-in-law. Second brother and I came out to make a living. I used to have a grandmother who was very good to me. She just passed away last year." Speaking of his grandmother, Zhang Xiaohua thought of many things again. Therefore, he told Xiaoming about how he started to open up wasteland last year, dug wells, went to the market during the new year, met bullies, and saved Luqian. In the end, he talked about how his elder brother met the bandits in Shizue Mountain when he married, and how his grandmother passed away at his elder brother's wedding. He talked for a whole morning. In the end, not only did Zhang Xiaohua cry sadly, but even Xiaoming also cried. She was sad for the experience of Zhang Xiaohua's family and the death of Zhang Xiaohua's beloved grandmother. Xiaoming looked at Zhang Xiaohua enviously and said, "Brother Xiaohua, you have a harmonious and loving family. I really envy you. I don't know where my home is, and I don't know where to find it." Zhang Xiaohua comforted her and said, "Everyone has a home, and so do you. Maybe you don't know where to find it now, but it doesn't mean that you don't have a home. I believe that you will be able to find your home in the future, your father and mother. Moreover, Shirtai is very good to you now. She loves you as much as her mother." Xiaoming said with a smile, "Xiaohua, you are right. I must have a home, and like you, I must have a lot of family stories. My family is also very loving. When I remember or find it, I will tell you, okay?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "No problem, Xiaoming. I believe I will wait until the day you tell me. Moreover, if there is a chance in the future, I am very willing to invite you to our Guizhuang house. My father, mother, elder brother, and sister-in-law will all like you very much." Xiaoming also smiled. Her smile was like a flower, and in an instant, the slightly cold shell just now faded away. Perhaps this was the true temperament of a teenage girl. At this moment, Xiaoming only wanted to stretch out her small hand and make a pinky promise with the youth who was still recuperating. But when her small hand was halfway out, she thought that this was just a young game. Perhaps it was not suitable for her to do so at this age. A blush appeared on her face, and she quickly withdrew her small hand. The youth in front of her looked extremely ordinary, and his face was pale because of his illness. However, he was the first playmate in her memory. Although this playmate was most likely lying on the bed, the home he mentioned gave Xiaoming perfect expectations. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua's home, Zhang Xiaohua's people, and Zhang Xiaohua's things all left a very deep impression on Xiaoming. Shirtai gave her the care of an elder, while Zhang Xiaohua gave her the joy of a companion. This, perhaps, was called fate. The sun was shining brightly, and the river was gurgling. On this endless continent, there might be stories of joys and sorrows happening every day. However, at this time, it belonged to the boys and girls beside the cottage. Only with support and trust would there be hope and a future. That night, Shirtai came back very late. He also looked extremely tired. However, Zhang Xiaohua and Xiaoming had never been nosy people, so they did not ask much. The next day, Shirtai did not go out, which was unusual. Instead, he called Zhang Xiaohua and Xiaoming to the cottage. Zhang Xiaohua had a premonition. As expected, Shirtai first checked Zhang Xiaohua's injuries, and then said, Zhang Xiaohua, your injuries have stabilized. There are no major problems. In the future, you just need a rest. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly bowed and said, This is all thanks to you, Shirtai. Thank you so much. Shirtai smiled and said, You are still so polite. We have lived together for more than 10 days, and I even see you as my nephew. Don't mention the words of thanks again. However, the end of the year is approaching, and I can't stay here any longer. Tomorrow, we will set off for the encampment of our sect. Xiaoming will go with me. What about you? What are your plans? Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and asked, Shirtai, what do you think I should do? Shirtai said, Your injuries are not serious. You can barely go with us. There may be changes on the way, but with me, it won't be too serious. I can put you in the nearest town, and then you can make your own plans. You can find a way back, or you can recuperate in the town. Zhang Xiaohua asked again. Then, Shirtai, I want to ask again. Xiaoming, what are your plans? Shirtai smiled and said, As for Xiaoming, I plan to take her back to the sect first. Her aptitude is average, and she is old. Although it is not suitable for her to practice martial arts, it is not difficult for me to take her in with my status. Let's not talk about practicing any peerless martial arts. As long as she can protect herself and live a stable life in the future, it will be enough. Xiaoming had been worried about her future, but she was indifferent and sometimes was too lazy to ask. This time, when she saw Zhang Xiaohua asking for her and Shirtai thinking for her so thoroughly, her eyes could not help but turn red. She walked to the Shirtai, pulled her sleeve, and said, Shirtai, thank you. Shirtai lovingly touched Xiaoming's head and said, Xiaoming, it is my fate to meet you. Looking at you now, you have the shadow of me in the past. Since I have some ability to take care of you, I am naturally willing to help you. In this Jianghu, it is not necessarily full of schemes and tricks. There is also warmth. Xiaoming seemed to understand and nodded. When Zhang Xiaohua heard that there was such a good thing, he cried, Shirtai, you accept one disciple, 2 disciples are also accepted. Why don't you accept me as your disciple? Shirtai smiled and said, Although there are male disciples in our sect, they have never been pro-disciples. Male disciples also belong to the outer sect. I can't accept male disciples. If you're willing to go to our sect, I can consider finding someone to accept you. However, you are old and have passed the best time to practice martial arts. This martial art may not be able to succeed. Zhang Xiaohua's heart was cold. Why did these masters have this argument? Forget it. Thinking of Oyan's promise, he was still a little disheartened and said, I just want Shirtai to teach me. If it is someone else, then forget it. Shirtai said, You child, to be able to enter my sect, even if you are an outer sect disciple, the requirements are extremely high. However, she didn't want to say the name of the sect, nor did she want to force Zhang Xiaohua, so she didn't say anything more. Zhang Xiaohua said again, Abbess, I've thought about it and decided that I won't follow you to the nearest town. As you said just now, there's still some problems. First, I'm afraid that if anything happens, it will affect your plans. Second, if you bring me along, won't it also affect your itinerary? I'll just stay here and recuperate from my injuries. Besides, this place is near the river, so my companions might find their way here in the next few days. If I leave now, won't I miss them again? Shirtai was silent for a moment and said, Zhang Xiaohua, what you said makes sense. It's better to be quiet than to move. You'd better recuperate here. The surroundings are very safe, and there is enough food for you to spend the new year. By the way, I'll tell you the route to the town later. Don't get lost in the end. After saying that, Shirtai told Zhang Xiaohua the route from the cottage to the town in detail. Then she took out some silver from her arms and gave it to Zhang Xiaohua. Only then did she take Xiaoming out to pack their things. Perhaps it was the last time she would spend with Shirtai and Xiaoming. Zhang Xiaohua felt that time passed abnormally fast. Unknowingly, it was evening. The sun was setting, and a faint red color hung on the west mountain. Zhang Xiaohua held her cheeks and sat alone by the river. At this time, Xiaoming quietly walked over. Like Zhang Xiaohua, Xiaoming sat by the river with one hand behind her back. She looked at the sun in the distance and asked, "What are you thinking about?" Zhang Xiaohua said, "I'm thinking that the ancient said that the sunset is infinitely good. It's just that dusk is near. This beautiful time is always short." Xiaoming was also sad and said, "It's precisely because it's short that it's beautiful. If it lasts for a long time, it will be boring." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Xiaoming is right. We've only met for more than 10 days. Naturally, it feels good. If it's more than 10 years, what will happen?" Xiaoming's face was a little red. She didn't know if Zhang Xiaohua said it unintentionally, or if she listened attentively, or if it was the reflection of the setting sun. "Please collect it. Thank you." Chapter 130. In fact, Xiaoming was still thinking too much. Zhang Xiaohua was just expressing his feelings. He didn't have any girls to play with since he was young. These 10 days were when his body was at its weakest. Suddenly, there was a girl around his age who took care of him and talked to him. He felt very good. Naturally, he would think about how it would feel after a long time. How could he know anything now? Of course, he didn't know what was the first awakening of love. Then, Zhang Xiaohua said, "It can be considered fate to accompany you in this wilderness. However, after parting today, I don't know when we will meet again." Looking at Shirtai's intention, you have to practice martial arts well. When your martial arts are great, when you go to Jianghu to do chivalrous deeds, you may be able to meet again. Xiaoming thought and said, "Gid Xiaohua, I don't know which sect Shirtai is in. Can you tell me where you are?" Zhang Xiaohua was silent and said, "I didn't join any sect. I only practice some incomplete fist techniques. As for other things, I told you everything I can. This is related to the safety of some people. It's better if I don't say." AI. Poor Zhang Xiaohua. Why didn't he know anything about a girl's thoughts? Can't you just say a few more words? However, it was his behavior that made Xiaoming feel that he was different from others. Xiaoming nodded and said, "I know that Xiaohua Gij is from Lu Town and lives in the Guozhuang house." That's enough. Then, Xiaoming bit her lower lip. The hand that had been behind her back stretched out in front of her eyes. She said to Zhang Xiaohua with a trembling voice, "Xiaohua Gij, after parting today, I don't know when we will meet again. I found this in my own purse. I carry it with me. I don't remember its origin, but it looks a little familiar. It must be something that belongs to me. Now, I will give it to you as a souvenir." When Zhang Xiaohua looked carefully, he saw that the jade-like girl was holding a pair of pearl hair clips. He couldn't help but be shocked. He waved his hand and said, "How can I dare to accept such a precious thing?" Xiaoming said angrily, "What's so precious about it? Was it because it was valuable? But even if it was worth a lot of money, if no one used it, how much money would it be worth if it was casually thrown away? But even if it was a worthless item, if someone cherished it, wouldn't it be more valuable than this item that no one wanted? If you don't want it, I'll just throw it into the river." After that, he was about to throw it away. Zhang Xiaohua saw this and hurriedly said, "Don't throw it away. I'll take it." He hurriedly caught it with his hand and muttered in his heart, "This is worth 4 or 5 taels of silver. Wouldn't it be a pity to throw it into the water for no reason?" How could Xiaoming hear his thoughts? Seeing him take it, she also smiled sweetly. However, after that, Zhang Xiaohua rummaged through his body. Then, he awkwardly took out his toy sword and handed it to Xiaoming. Xiaoming didn't know why, but she reached out to take it. Unexpectedly, the toy was very heavy. She wasn't careful and almost slipped to the ground. Xiaoming used her strength to hold it in her hand. Then, she heard Zhang Xiaohua say apologetically, "The ancient said that it was impolite to come and go. But after searching all over my body, I only have this one thing. How about I give it to you as a souvenir?" Xiaoming looked at this abnormally heavy and black thing. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She said, such a precious thing. How do you want me to hold it? The word heavy was pronounced very heavily. Zhang Xiaohua scratched his head and spread out his hands. He said, but I only have this one thing. Xiao Meng saw that he really gave it to her. Her eyes turned, and she said with a smile, then I'll accept it. However, this little thing is too heavy. It's not convenient for me to hold it. How about I leave it with you first? After saying this, she laboriously handed it over. Zhang Xiaohua tilted his head and thought for a moment. Then, he took it and said, then it's a deal. From now on, this thing is yours. I'm just temporarily keeping it. Xiao Meng smiled and nodded. But when Zhang Xiaohua put the small sword into his arms, he still felt that it wasn't appropriate. He tilted his head and thought for a moment. Then he patted his forehead and said, got it. Then, from the pair of pearl hair clips in his hand, he took out one and gave it to Xiao Meng. He said, you give his pearl hair clip to me. It's mine. I'll give you another one. How about we each take half? When Xiao Meng heard this, her face flushed red. It seemed that blood was about to drip down. She looked at the pearl hair clip in her small hand. She didn't know whether to take it or not. She just wanted to give her first playmate a souvenir. But this Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have misunderstood something. If this pair of pearl hair clips was taken by a man and a woman, what would it become? What did it mean? Was Zhang Xiaohua hinting at something? Should she take it or not? Should she explain it to him? She had a trace of affection for Zhang Xiaohua, but it shouldn't be to this extent. It seemed that whether to take it or not was a problem. However, immediately, Zhang Xiaohua's words fell in her ears. This pair of pearl hair clips is worth 4 taels of silver. I'll keep half of it, which is only 2 taels of silver. My heart can be considered stable. Xiao Meng's face was still red. She fiercely glared at Zhang Xiaohua, stamped her feet, and snatched the pearl hair clip from Zhang Xiaohua's hand. She rebuked, stable your deadhead. After that, she turned around and ran back to the cottage. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but be stunned on the spot. He murmured, wasn't it fine just now? I kindly gave you a pearl hair clip. How did it become like this? Then, Zhang Xiaohua subconsciously looked at the sky and muttered, it's not raining today. Why are you in such a hurry to go back? You don't need to take the clothes. Until the night's rest, Xiao Meng's face was as cold as ice. She didn't give him any smile. Zhang Xiaohua didn't know what he had done to offend her. When he woke up the next day, Zhang Xiaohua found a small cloth bag beside the Kong. He opened it and saw some scattered silver inside. He couldn't help but feel a little warm in his heart. At the same time, he also had a bad premonition. So he took the cloth bag and hurried out. Sure enough, the house was empty. Shirtai, and Xiao Meng had left long before dawn. Zhang Xiaohua held the warm cloth bag in his hand. He understood that Shirtai was really a good person. He had already given him some silver yesterday. Now that he was leaving, he was afraid that he wouldn't have enough. The next time he saw him, he must pay him back double. However, he didn't notice that the cloth bag with silver was Xiao Meng's handkerchief. This was normal. As long as it was something with silver, he would only look at silver. Zhang Xiaohua stood at the door of the cottage and was stunned for a moment. Then, he came back to his senses and went back to the house in disappointment. When the Shirtai left, she must have come to his house to say goodbye. However, she couldn't wake him up. He must be surprised. This was also good. He left quietly and didn't take away any clouds. He didn't want to hold hands and look at each other with tears. He was speechless. At this time, a person dozens of miles away was also thinking, why does Zhang Xiaohua sleep like a pig? He doesn't wake up no matter how I call him. There were usually 3 people in the cottage. Suddenly, there were 2 less people. The loneliness increased greatly. During this time, Xiao Meng didn't leave his side and often talked to him. Although Shirtai didn't appear in the cottage usually, Zhang Xiaohua could always see her sooner or later. So, he felt that there were people in the cottage usually. Today, he was left alone in the cottage. He felt bored every moment. Since Zhang Xiaohua learned how to read, he had been using books to pass the time. Now, where would there be books in this shabby cottage? So, he came to the open space in front of the cottage again. He wanted to get into a posture and practice the Big Dipper magical fist. However, after just a few moves and some twists and turns, he felt a sharp pain in his body. He had to stop with cold sweat on his face. What should he do? However, Zhang Xiaohua saw the small mountain not far from the cottage and had a new idea. He had been in the cottage for a long time, but he had never stepped out of the cottage. Now it was the same. It was a good thing to go to the back. So, not long after, Zhang Xiaohua took a small stick that he found in the cottage and used it as a crutch. Holding it with his left hand, he walked to the back of the cottage step by step. However, just as he turned around the cottage, he found that there was a very high hill behind the cottage. With his current illness, it would be difficult to climb over. Zhang Xiaohua had no choice but to walk along the side of the hill. He just wanted to find a place where the slope was slightly lower. As expected, after walking for a while, there was a place where the slope was slightly lower. Zhang Xiaohua looked around and carefully climbed up with the help of the small stick. When he reached the top of the hill, he saw a different scene. This was a flat land full of trees. The bleak winter wind blew all the trees in his eyes, leaving only bare branches reaching to the sky. The ground was full of fallen leaves and weeds. The hill that he saw in the cottage was at the end of his vision. It was also the end of the forest. At a glance, he didn't know how far it was. Zhang Xiaohua walked along the high hill for a while and found a place where he could go down. Then, he slid down the high hill. The forest was full of fallen leaves. It was very comfortable to walk up. Zhang Xiaohua looked around and walked forward. There were some birds chirping in the forest. The chirping was very moving. Occasionally, there were the sounds of small animals jumping between the branches. Zhang Xiaohua heard it clearly. They should be squirrels. Even after walking for a while, he heard the hurried sounds of leaves and weeds in the forest. At first, Zhang Xiaohua thought that there were people walking like him, but the sounds were hurried and intermittent. After listening for a while, he suddenly realized that it was probably some rabbits looking for food for winter. Thinking of small animals, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Life in the cottage was very peaceful. They didn't even have to eat meat. It had been a long time since he smelled meat. He was craving it. If he could catch a rabbit or something like that to eat, how good would that be? But what about his own injuries? Zhang Xiaohua looked at the small walking stick in his hand and gave up this idea for the time being. Zhang Xiaohua continued forward for a while and looked up at the small mountain again. It was still not far away. Only then did he understand the true meaning of the phrase, "a mountain runs to its death." If he insisted on continuing forward, he would be exhausted to death today. So be it. He just came out for a walk. There was no reason for him to be exhausted. He casually picked up a few dry branches on the ground and turned back. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua thought of a problem. The shirt-eye went out early and came back late every day. In this place where birds shit every day, what was there to be busy with? However, the shirt-eye's lightness skill was very good. Naturally, she could move around a wide range. Maybe she was looking for something. Maybe she was looking for someone. Maybe she was thinking about the problem, or maybe she was going back the way she came. But not long after, Zhang Xiaohua returned to the front of the high slope. Looking at the high slope that he had to climb up with difficulty, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but shake his head. The shirt-eye had its own way of doing things. Wasn't he worried for the ancient people? Zhang Xiaohua shook his head and began to climb up the ladder. Walking back to the cottage, Zhang Xiaohua was already covered in sweat. However, his body was also very comfortable. Life was about exercise. The ancient people didn't lie to him. The rest of the time was also boring. Zhang Xiaohua took the fishing rod left by Xiaoming and wanted to go fishing. However, he couldn't find a suitable bait near the cottage. He had to learn from Xiaoming and throw the fishing line into the river. Looking at the flowing river, he prayed that the fish would take the bait. Presumably, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was not sincere. God didn't hear his prayer. God didn't send him any fish, and he didn't catch anything. However, this boring time was spent by Zhang Xiaohua. After a few more days, Zhang Xiaohua felt much better. Then he tried to practice boxing again. Although there were many places where he still couldn't fully perform, his hands and feet became more flexible. He didn't look sick anymore. It was getting colder day by day. However, Zhang Xiaohua had a question that he couldn't figure out. He remembered that when winter came last year, he was still very afraid of the cold and wore a cotton-padded jacket early. However, he didn't know how it was this year. The cold wind was blowing. Although the snow hadn't fallen yet, it was already cold. He was still wearing the jacket that he wore when he came out of the Huanxi mountain villa. Why didn't he feel cold? It was really strange. Was this place already in the south? Was it not as cold as the Guozhuang house in winter? After immersing himself in the boxing for a few days, Zhang Xiaohua didn't find the answer to his problem. However, the problem of boxing was solved with time. Zhang Xiaohua could now perform the whole set of Fist of the North Star with difficulty. The Fist of the North Star was also magical. No matter how slow or fast Zhang Xiaohua's speed was, as long as he practiced it over and over again, the flow would definitely appear by the 9th time. Of course, the difference was still in the amount of the flow. In the past, when Zhang Xiaohua practiced boxing in a mountain villa, he could only produce 3 different flows of hot and cold in the morning and at night. Since he didn't have to farm in the cottage, he spent all his time practicing boxing. However, after repeated practice, he found that the flow didn't appear without limit. Zhang Xiaohua practiced boxing 81 times a day. After 9 flows appeared in his body, no matter how fast or slow Zhang Xiaohua practiced boxing, the flow would never appear again. Could it be that the flow could only appear 9 times a day? Actually, in addition to practicing boxing, Zhang Xiaohua also tried to practice the sword moves that Elder Yu taught him. This time, he was able to kill the black-robed old man in the night attack completely because of this sword move. Zhang Xiaohua deeply understood the importance of these 16 life-saving changes. How could he not practice properly? Unfortunately, this sword move couldn't be compared to boxing. It was basically flashing and moving in the air. After practicing for a while, Zhang Xiaohua immediately felt that his body couldn't take it anymore and stopped. However, it wasn't without results. When Zhang Xiaohua stopped, he immediately thought that if he had immediately performed other changes after stabbing the black-robed old man's throat, that palm that almost killed him wouldn't have hit him. Of course, this was just a thought. However, there were only changes in the sword move and no changes in the footwork. This sword move would always be a heroic suicide. Zhang Xiaohua's state of mind was probably far from reaching that level. Zhang Xiaohua's boxing was practiced day by day. He also slowly practiced his sword moves. His body was also getting better day by day. However, there was still no news of the person he was waiting for. No matter if it was on land, no one passed by. Even in the river, there were no boats. Sometimes, Zhang Xiaohua was a little puzzled. How did this Shirtai find his cottage? Zhang Xiaohua was a little hesitant. Should he wait or not? Perhaps he should have left with the Shirtai at that time. Just as Zhang Xiaohua was hesitating, the first snow of the new year finally fell. Actually, as for whether it was the new year or not, Zhang Xiaohua already couldn't remember. However, when he saw the snow, he naturally thought of the new year. He would just take it as an auspicious sign of the new year. Since the first time, Zhang Xiaohua had also gone to the woods behind the cottage several times. However, he returned empty-handed. Now that it was snowing heavily, it was a good opportunity to hunt. One morning, Zhang Xiaohua took his small crutch again and went straight to the high slope behind the cottage. Everyone had a habit, and Zhang Xiaohua was no exception. He still took the route that he had chosen for the first time. When Zhang Xiaohua walked into this snow-white world, not only did he feel that the world was full of ice and snow, but he also felt lucky that there were many animal footprints on the thick snow. He guessed that he wouldn't return empty-handed this time. However, when Zhang Xiaohua really walked into the woods, he realized how wrong he was. The thick snow was either flat as before, or there were countless shallow and small traces. Where could he find the footprints of rabbits and other animals? On this vast land, it seemed that only his footprints came from afar. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a while and identified the direction. He walked towards the distant hill. Perhaps there would be delicious prey there. Perhaps it was snowing. Along the way, Zhang Xiaohua rarely heard the chirping of birds. He guessed that they were all hiding in their nests and slacking off. According to Zhang Xiaohua's observation, there were no traces of animals on the snow. However, There was nothing strange. The snow was still falling. Perhaps it had been buried long ago. After walking for a while, the hill still seemed to be far away. However, this time Zhang Xiaohua was determined. Thinking of hunting there, he didn't give up early like the previous times, unless he could find rabbits in the woods. However, cunning rabbits always had 3 burrows. How could Zhang Xiaohua, who didn't have much hunting experience, find them? Therefore, the greedy Zhang Xiaohua could only trudge on the snow with difficulty. Please collect. Thank you. Chapter 131. Zhang Xiaohua walked for a whole morning, but the snow seemed to show no signs of stopping. The more he walked, the more inconvenient it became. From time to time, there was a tendency for him to slip. Zhang Xiaohua could only carefully rely on the small walking stick. In the forest, the world was full of snow and branches. In addition to the falling snowflakes, there was only the squeaking sound of Zhang Xiaohua's feet stepping on the snow. In this environment, it was actually impossible to distinguish between north and south. Not to distinguish between north and south, but to Zhang Xiaohua, who had no sense of direction, there was not much difference. He only needed to look up at the small mountain. After not looking for a while, he suddenly looked up and found that he was much closer to the small mountain. However, Zhang Xiaohua's interest was not in the mountain, but the animals that could be eaten. After walking for a long time, he did not find the wild rabbits that were commonly seen on the mountain of Guozhuang House. Even the squirrels jumping on the trees were rare. How could he catch them to eat? Zhang Xiaohua was more and more surprised. However, if the squirrels hibernating in the tree hole knew Zhang Xiaohua's thoughts, perhaps they would collectively wake up from their hibernation and bite him together. We usually dance on the tree. It's fine if you admire us. Now that the snow has sealed the mountain, we are sleeping. You want to eat us? Do you want us to live? If scholarly Jin Feng knew, he would secretly give him a copy of Man and Nature, and then secretly feel ashamed. It was because of the teacher's laziness that he did not teach strictly. Zhang Xiaohua looked around just like this as he ceaselessly moved forward. As he walked, his eyelids suddenly twitched, and he immediately stopped moving. When he narrowed his eyes and looked ahead, he couldn't help but be overjoyed in his heart. Wasn't there a gray-colored and plump wild rabbit a few tens of steps away from him? Was that not the braised rabbit leg that he had been yearning for day and night? Since she had found her prey, Zhang Xiaohua began to carefully move forward. She moved lightly, afraid that she would disturb the dazed rabbit's state of mind. Unfortunately, even though Zhang Xiaohua had the experience of chasing chickens and rabbits when he was young, it was just a child's play. When it came to real hunting, he was far from being able to catch this silly rabbit in the snow. Look, when he was only a few feet away, the rabbit's long ears shook, and it immediately broke free from the state of being one with the rabbit. It was no longer a silly rabbit. At this moment, it had inherited the glorious tradition of the rabbit spirits. The souls of Bugs Bunny, Roger Rabbit, and Zhang Xiaohua were all possessed at this moment. At this moment, this silly rabbit was no longer a rabbit facing Zhang Xiaohua. It was all the rabbits that were being hunted. At this moment, it ran away, quickly distancing itself from Zhang Xiaohua. Rabbit run! How could Zhang Xiaohua let the braised rabbit leg that was right in front of his mouth escape? He immediately chased after it, throwing the situation of his body's injuries to the back of his mind. Alas, sometimes the human body could still control the body. Thus, the man and the rabbit began a chase in the snowy wilderness. That rabbit was clever, running very fast and changing directions from time to time, making it very difficult for Zhang Xiaohua to chase. On the other hand, although Zhang Xiaohua did not run very fast, he had the advantage of continuously exerting his strength. This horse stance took half a day, and his physical fitness was not for show. After chasing for a while, he did not feel anything. It was just that the injuries in his body had not healed, and there was pain from time to time, which did not allow him to exert his full strength. He could only maintain a certain speed, chase after the rabbit, and wait for the rabbit to be tired, and then capture it in one fell swoop. Zhang Xiaohua's little abacus crackled loudly, and his strategy was also very correct. Indeed, after chasing for a while, the rabbit's footsteps slowed down slightly. Zhang Xiaohua laughed in his heart and put more strength into his feet. But as he chased, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes suddenly lit up. In front of him was a flat, open ground, and not far from the flat ground was the small mountain that he had always wanted to see. It turned out that during the chase between the man and the rabbit, he had already unknowingly run out of the big forest. However, with the prey in front of him, Zhang Xiaohua did not have the time to admire the scene of a dancing silver snake in the field, and only chased after the rabbit that was also slightly dazed. The rabbit was also not careless. Hearing the sound behind it, it put more strength into it and ran diagonally towards the small mountain. Not long after, it ran to the front of the mountain. The rabbit also changed its speed from just now and ran slower. It must have been exhausted by Zhang Xiaohua's chase, but the mountain in front of it was not as high as the slope behind the cottage. It was very steep, so how could the rabbit climb up? It originally thought that it was a way to escape, but when it got closer, it found that it was a hopeless situation. The rabbit paused for a while and ran along the mountain in a direction. Zhang Xiaohua naturally chased all the way. The rabbit ran slower and slower, and Zhang Xiaohua was getting closer and closer. Just a few more steps, Zhang Xiaohua could reach out and catch it. However, at this moment, the rabbit suddenly stopped and sniffed around with its nose. Its long ears turned, and it looked back at Zhang Xiaohua, and then turned its head and ran towards the mountain. Zhang Xiaohua saw this from behind, and could not help but be amused. Could it be that this silly rabbit had become stupid after being chased by her, running into a rock by itself? The ancient said that the cloud could protect the tree and wait for the rabbit. They really did not deceive her. However, what happened next made Zhang Xiaohua's jaw drop. The silly rabbit ran into the mountain rock, but did not die as Zhang Xiaohua had imagined. Instead, she felt a faint light flash, and the gray rabbit, the rabbit that Zhang Xiaohua had been chasing for the whole morning, actually disappeared. Zhang Xiaohua ran closer and rubbed her eyes in disbelief, wondering if her eyes were playing tricks on her. If it was not for the traces of the rabbit running through the snow, Zhang Xiaohua really thought that she was dreaming this whole morning. Zhang Xiaohua foolishly walked in front of the mountain rock where the rabbit disappeared. He did not dare to touch it with his hands, and only used the small walking stick to poke at the mountain rock. He did not find anything unusual, and the walking stick did not disappear, so he poked at the nearby stone wall again. Sure enough, he soon found something unusual. The place where the rabbit disappeared was in a circular area about half a person's height. Although there was no abnormal feeling when the walking stick poked it, but there were no snowflakes floating down, nor were there any gravel or mud falling down from above. And to the side, it was the same as Zhang Xiaohua's understanding. It could be brushed off the snowflakes, but if one used too much strength, some mud would fall from above. It was clear that if something was out of the ordinary, there must be something fishy about it. Then, Zhang Xiaohua used the walking stick to test the bottom. In the place where the rabbit's traces disappeared, there was an area about 1 foot square that the walking stick could reach. It was as if there was an invisible hole here. Seeing his small walking stick easily reach into the stone wall, Zhang Xiaohua still could not believe that this was the truth. The walking stick was about to reach the end, but the hole was still bottomless. When the stone wall was close to the hand of the walking stick, Zhang Xiaohua stopped, hesitated for a moment, and then reached in. He knew that his hand had disappeared, leaving only his wrist stuck in the stone wall. Only then did he truly believe that there was a hole here. When Zhang Xiaohua withdrew his walking stick and hand, he stood in the snow and carefully thought, what exactly was inside this thing? Should he take the risk and go in to take a look? Zhang Xiaohua was no less curious about the young man. However, if he had to go into an unknown hole just for a wild rabbit or a trace of curiosity, Zhang Xiaohua would never do it. He knew that curiosity killed the cat. However, if he went back to the cottage empty-handed, Zhang Xiaohua was also not willing to do it. After thinking for a moment, Zhang Xiaohua returned to the forest arrogantly. However, when he was about halfway, Zhang Xiaohua bent down, crawled on the snow, and quietly poked his head out. Just right, he could see the stone wall. Zhang Xiaohua started to make a living by waiting for rabbits. However, after waiting for a while, the wild rabbit still did not come out. Zhang Xiaohua was a little annoyed. Maybe the rabbit was too smart. It hid in there, and it was free. Maybe it was dangerous inside, and the rabbit had already died. Maybe there was another way out, and the rabbit had already run away. Thinking that the rabbit had already run away, and he was still foolishly crawling on the snow, Zhang Xiaohua thought of something. But at that moment, a wild rabbit's head suddenly popped out of the hard stone wall. From afar, it looked very strange. The wild rabbit's head had long ears. It looked left and right before shrinking back. Then it jumped out of the stone wall and ran off into the distance along the small mountain peak. Seeing the wild rabbit run out, Zhang Xiaohua did not immediately chase after it. Instead, he crouched there and waited for a while. After making sure that nothing else would jump out of the stone wall, he slowly walked over. In fact, when Zhang Xiaohua was crouching on the snow just now, he had already made up his mind. If the rabbit could come out, it would not be dangerous. Moreover, there was no other way. It was very likely to be a closed place. Moreover, the hole was only 1 foot wide. A slightly bigger animal would not be able to get in. Therefore, there should not be any danger. If the rabbit went in and did not come out, then Zhang Xiaohua did not have the courage to go in and play around. When he got close to the stone wall, Zhang Xiaohua stopped again. He crouched down and reached in with his walking stick again. This time, he wanted to see if it was a long and narrow passage or a space that could allow a person to stand up. Sure enough, when his hand reached in, he exerted force, and the walking stick stood up. It did not encounter any obstacles. Zhang Xiaohua knew what was going on. Then, he took out the small sword from his pocket and held it in his left hand and the walking stick in his right hand. First, he reached in and shook it for a moment. Then he gritted his teeth and crouched on the snow, climbing stiffly towards the 1 foot wide stone wall. Zhang Xiaohua, who was crouching on the ground, only felt his vision blur. Then, he entered another place. Wasn't this a cave? He was crouching on the snow in front of the cave. When Zhang Xiaohua stood up and looked carefully, there was something like a thick fog behind him. There was light coming in from the outside, but he could not see the scene outside. The snowflakes were still as big as outside, falling from the top of his head through the fog. On the snow, there were still traces of the rabbits jumping. In front of him, there was a small cave that was commonly seen on the mountain peak. It was slightly taller than Zhang Xiaohua, but it was pitch black inside. He could not see clearly. The traces of the rabbit led to the inside. It was very messy. The rabbit must have entered and exited several times. Seeing such a scene, Zhang Xiaohua's heart tensed up a little. However, he still threw the walking stick in his hand into the cave first. When he heard a dang sound from inside, there was no other sound. He then took out the fire starter from his pocket and carefully lit it. He held it in his right hand and the small sword in his left hand in front of his chest. Step by step, he walked into the pitch-black cave. When he walked into the cave, he carefully looked around with the fire starter. Only then did he feel completely relieved. This was an ordinary cave, the size of a small house. In the innermost part, there was a rectangular stone strip. Next to the stone strip, there was a stone table. There were a few small stone benches around. On the stone table, there was a money bag and a small square stone. The rest was empty. Then there was the small walking stick lying on the ground. Seeing the scene in front of him, Zhang Xiaohua secretly frowned. What was this place? It was so mysterious. There was nothing inside, only a money bag. He was not in a hurry to take the money bag. It was on the stone table. Sooner or later, it would be his. He could take it according to his mood. Therefore, he still did not give up. He took the fire starter and carefully looked around the cave. He even picked up the walking stick and knocked on the stone wall. However, other than seeing some spherical pits on the stone wall, he did not find anything. That pit was a little high. Zhang Xiaohua's fingers could not reach it. He deliberately used the walking stick to poke at it, but he did not find anything. Only then did he give up and came to the front of the stone table. Zhang Xiaohua took the small sword and picked up the money bag. He moved it. Seeing that there was nothing unusual, he moved the small square stone. It was also normal. Only then did he put the small sword back in his pocket. He picked up the stone with his left hand and looked at it carefully with the fire starter in front of his eyes. However, when he looked left, right, up and down, why couldn't he see any difference between it and the pebbles by the river? Could it be because of the different shape? Zhang Xiaohua angrily threw the stone back on the stone table. He picked up the money bag, full of expectations. However, when he picked it up lightly, his heart immediately floated. The enthusiasm in his heart turned into snow. He thought that this money bag would at least be filled with a few pieces of silver. It would be best if it could be filled with a few pieces of gold. That would be good. However, the first feeling in his hand told him that it was empty. Zhang Xiaohua did not give up and squeezed with all his strength. However, he did not pinch anything out of it. He then shook it down, but he did not shake out a single rabbit hair. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but be filled with regret. If he had known earlier, he would have caught that silly rabbit first. At least he could have a good meal at night. This was great. An empty money bag, a broken stone, nothing to do, and also a lot of time crawl in the snow. Zhang Xiaohua curled his lips. Just as he was about to throw the money bag back to the stone table, he twisted it with 2 fingers. He felt that the cloth of the money bag was not bad. It was quite delicate. Besides, he did not have a money bag. The silver that the master gave him was still in a piece of cloth. Now it was just right. Zhang Xiaohua put the fire starter on the stone table. He took out the scattered silver from his pocket and poured it all into the money bag. He tied the mouth and threw it up and down in the air. Then he caught it. The feeling was quite good. At least this trip was not in vain. After that, Zhang Xiaohua was about to take the fire starter from the stone table. At this time, his eyes fell on the stone. He said that if this was an ordinary stone, would someone be bored enough to put it on the table? Perhaps there is some mystery inside that he could not see through. Forget it. He would rather see wrongly than let it go. How could he have the time to return to a treasure mountain? Even if it was a small stone, he would still take it away. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua picked up the small square stone again and threw it into the money bag. He put it into his pocket and then picked up the fire starter. He looked around again and then slowly walked out of the cave. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the inconceivable thick fog in front of the cave. It was very strange. In such a mystical place, how could there be nothing mystical left for him? Even if there was a bag full of gold, he would not be surprised. But it just had to be an empty money bag. Suddenly, he thought of a problem. Why was there a 1-foot hole in the fog that he could enter? Someone must have been here. Since someone had been here, how could there be anything left for him? This empty money bag must have been taken by someone and casually thrown down. And that small white square stone must have been thrown away by someone. Zhang Xiaohua sighed in his heart. Forget it. His luck was not on his side. Even if he picked up a money bag, it was not bad. At least it was worth his scattered silver. After calming himself down, Zhang Xiaohua prepared to go out. The snow at the entrance of the cave was even heavier. The traces of him entering were almost covered up. Zhang Xiaohua picked up his walking stick again and bent down. He slowly drilled out of the invisible hole. Then, an inconceivable scene appeared on the stone wall outside. First, a stick poked out from the hard stone wall. Then, a young man's head poked out. Then he slowly crawled out until his whole body came out. Luckily, there was no one else in the wilderness. There was no need to shock the world. When Zhang Xiaohua crawled out, he looked around. It was already late. The forest was still the same. There were still no wild rabbits. Zhang Xiaohua patted the snow and mud off his body. Looking at the stone wall behind him, which was no different from the other parts of the mountain, he followed the footprints that were not covered by the snow and went back the way he came. After Zhang Xiaohua left, the snow became heavier. Not long after, the falling snow covered Zhang Xiaohua's footprints. Before dusk fell, there were no traces left. Only a plain empty space was left. At this time, poor Zhang Xiaohua, who had no sense of direction, could still vaguely recognize the footprints that were about to be covered by the snow. He quickly ran towards the cottage. As he ran, he secretly prayed that he would not get lost. Perhaps Zhang Xiaohua's prayer was effective, or perhaps it was because he had been to this forest many times before. When dusk fell, Zhang Xiaohua saw a high slope in front of him. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but rejoice in his heart. His tense mood relaxed, but at this moment his right foot suddenly kicked something hard. It did not look like a rock, nor did it look like a branch. When Zhang Xiaohua picked it up with his hand and brought it to his eyes, he vaguely saw that it was a frozen wild rabbit. "Please collect it. Thank you." Chapter 132. In the evening, Zhang Xiaohua finally ate the rabbit meat that she had been yearning for day and night. However, it was not braised. Although Zhang Xiaohua was born in a poor family and had been helping out at home since he was young, he was still a boy after all. The work he had done was in the fields. The work on the stove was still relatively unfamiliar to him. The closest thing he had done was to fetch spring water from the stove at home. Therefore, although she wanted to braise it, she simply peeled the rabbit's skin and learned for her father's way of handling chickens. She simply cleaned the rabbit and put it in the pot to cook. When the water boiled and the meat was cooked, although there was no seasoning, it still smelled fragrant. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but feel hungry. Then, Zhang Xiaohua closed her eyes and silently muttered in her heart, "I'm eating braised rabbit meat. I'm eating braised rabbit meat." Then, she was not afraid of the heat. She fished out the whole rabbit from the pot and chewed happily. Her mouth was full of oil. She was very happy until Zhang Xiaohua ate up the whole rabbit meat and licked the bare bones reluctantly. She threw the bones into the river in front of her. However, in the winter, the river that used to run in the past had already frozen. With a crack, the bones were thrown on the ice. It was impossible to destroy the evidence of the crime of eating meat. However, she was the fish meat, and she was the knife. Why should she be afraid? The law of the jungle was still applicable in Jianghu. Not to mention that Zhang Xiaohua, who had satisfied her craving for good food, was caressing her round belly while holding a small stick. She was leisurely licking her teeth and looking at the night sky that was still snowing heavily. She was secretly trying to figure out the essence of suddenly looking back at it in the waning light. In a conference hall of the Misty School in the far north, Peng was gathering several brothers in the school to find the bones that had been thrown out. It was not snowing in the Misty Mountain Villa, but the clouds were still dense and the cold wind was whimpering. Although the door of the conference hall was blocked by a thick curtain, it was still difficult to prevent the cold from entering. However, at this time, the atmosphere in the conference hall was unusually cold, making people feel that it was even colder than outside. At the front of the meeting hall, Grand Gang leader Peng was sitting in his usual position with a gloomy face. The flickering light cast a shadow across his face from time to time, making him look even more ferocious. Perhaps it was at this moment that the majesty of a superior was fully displayed. At this time, everyone in the conference hall was silent. No one dared to make a sound. After a long while, Peng coughed and asked gently, "Senior brother, how is Yenner's body?" Big Boss, who usually looked very inconspicuous, also had a straight face as he said, "Yenner's body is already weak. At night when she went out, she was drenched in the heavy rain and has already caught a cold. In addition, she was affected by the wind from the black-robed elder's palm and injured her internal organs. This illness and injury are quite serious. I heard from Halm Master Chin that she had already fainted on the way. After she woke up, she found a doctor along the way to treat her. After second brother rushed over, he also used his internal energy to treat Yenner's injuries. After taking the medicine from the sect, she was already much better when she came back. Now, the doctor in the sect has already seen her, and we have also invited a doctor from Pingyang City to treat her. Now, there is no major problem. After a short rest, she should be able to recover." Hearing that Yan's body had recovered, Peng's expression became slightly more restrained. He said to Big Boss, "Senior brother, I'm a little busy here during this period. Please pay more attention and take care of Yenner's matters." Big Boss nodded and said, "Yenner is our precious treasure. You can rest assured, now that she is in our territory, I won't let her suffer the slightest grievance. Openg nodded and asked Hall Master Lu Yujo of the Law Enforcement Hall, "How's the investigation of the background of the black-robed men?" Lu Yujo hesitated for a moment and said, "After I received Sect Master's instructions, I immediately led my subordinates to investigate this matter personally. I know that Eldest Miss and her group prioritize stability on their return journey. I'm afraid that it will take too long. Although the weather has turned cold, the corpses of the black-robed men will also rot. Therefore, I went ahead to receive Eldest Miss in advance. I have personally checked the corpses of the black-robed men. I have also seen the features of their faces and bodies. I have also asked my subordinates to record them and prepare a record. However, among these people, the black-robed old man's face has been disfigured, and I can't tell who he is. As for the others, they are all mediocre people. Although I have already drawn their faces and handed them to my disciples to secretly pay attention to them, it is not easy to find out the background of these people in the vast sea of people." Openg said angrily, "Find them. We must find them. Although it is difficult, it does not mean that it is impossible. As long as there is a trace of possibility, we must find out who is behind them." Lu Yujo hurriedly bowed and replied, "I will follow Sect Master's instructions." Openg calmed his emotions and then asked, "Are there any other clues?" Lu Yujo shook his head and said, "These black-robed men's clothes and weapons are all extremely common items. They are very common in the Jianghu. I was unable to find any valuable clues. Moreover, they did not carry anything with them at all. Even the cleverest housewife cannot cook a meal without rice. I was unable to find anything useful." Openg snorted through his nose and said, "Don't tell me you have no clue at all." Lu Yujo said in a low voice, "Your subordinate is incompetent. For the time being, I was unable to find any other clues." Then he opened his mouth and looked like he wanted to say something, but stopped. Openg could not help but frown and said, "If you have anything to say, just say it. You now have a great responsibility. You must find out who is behind this. Our Misty School is not a side school that can be bullied by others." Lu Yujo hurriedly bowed and said, "Your subordinate has more or less understood the situation at that time from the subordinates of Huanxi Manor and the female disciples of Mingsue Hall. However, I would like to know more about it. Hall Master Qin and Shernyo have been kept by Sect Master for the past few days. Your subordinate has not had the opportunity to find them. Do you think we should let them describe the situation at that time again today? It just so happens that all the elders are here." Openg nodded and said, "That would be good. I have also heard some things and felt that there was something fishy. Today we will let them explain it properly, and all of you can give us some advice. Shernyo, tell us the specific situation from beginning to end." Shernyo rubbed his bald head and said, "Sect Master, do you want to tell us everything?" Openg glared at him and said, "Nonsense, tell us everything." Shernyo thought for a moment and then said, "That day I drove the carriage, carrying Manor Lord O and Hall Master Qin out of Huanxi Manor's gate. Later, I felt refreshed and could not help but sing a little tune. At first they praised me, but as I sang, they did not like it. However, Sect Master, the heavens have pity on me. I only know this song. If you want me to sing something else, I can't sing it." Everyone listened and looked at each other in dismay. What was this? Lu Qingyang almost spat out the wine in her mouth. Then, everyone could not help but cover their mouth and laugh. Openg also did not know whether to laugh or cry. He waved his hand and said, "Shernyo, tell us the important things." Shernyo frowned and said, "Sect Master, didn't you want me to tell you everything?" Openg spat. "You have to tell me everything, but you also have to tell me everything that happened before and after the Manor Lord was attacked. When you drove out, the men in black were still nowhere to be seen. What's there to say? Also, what does your singing have to do with the attack?" Shernyo replied with grievance, "How would I know what is related to the black-clothed men? Maybe they were jealous because I sang well. Maybe when I drove out, the black-clothed men knew." Openg rolled his eyes and nodded. "That makes sense. Lu Yujo, do you understand?" Openg nodded and said, "That's right. Lu Yuzhou nodded and said, "This subordinate understands." Shernyo asked in surprise, "Master Lu, what do you understand?" "Why don't I understand?" Openg waved his hand and said, "It's none of your business. Just tell me." Shernyo asked patiently, "Then, do you still want to tell me everything?" Openg thought for a moment and said, "Just tell me everything." Shernyo asked again, "Do you really want to tell me everything?" Openg said angrily, "Just tell me. Don't talk so much nonsense. Even if you go to the toilet, you still have to tell me." Shernyo's face turned red. He hesitated and said, This need not be said." Openg gritted his teeth and was about to go berserk. Shernyo saw this and hurriedly told the truth. Although Shernyo was a careless and impetuous man, he talked about the things that happened along the way in detail. He spoke slowly and seemed to be very serious. When he said that every place along the way, there was a youth called Zhang Xiaohua who went out to find a place to practice martial arts, Openg couldn't help but frown. He looked suspiciously at Aunt Qin and said, "This youth called Zhang Xiaohua, why does his name sound so familiar?" Before Openg's voice fell, Lu Yuzhou immediately stood up and said anxiously, Master Qin, this youth goes out every day. Didn't you follow him? It's very likely that he's a mole for the black-clothed men. Where's this person now? I have to catch him and interrogate him." Shernyo, who was talking heartily, naturally didn't dare to say anything after being interrupted by Openg. But when he heard Lu Yuzhou shout, he immediately became angry and said angrily, "How can you say that about Zhang Xiaohua? I can guarantee that Zhang Xiaohua is definitely not a mole for the black-clothed men." Lu Yuzhou said, "As long as he's a mole, he'll naturally hide it very well. How could he let you know?" "Shernyo, you're more careless, so of course you wouldn't find out. Don't make a promise just because of personal feelings." At this time, a voice like an oriole's chirp sounded. Master Lu, I also have the same thoughts as Shernyo. I'm willing to use my life to guarantee that this Zhang Xiaohua is definitely not a mole." Lu Yuzhou didn't need to turn around and know that it was Aunt Qin who spoke. He frowned and said, Master Qin, now isn't the time to let your emotions affect your decisions. We're looking for clues, and we have to be suspicious of any clues. It's better to mistakenly kill one than to let one go. However, Aunt Qin was a bit anxious and said in one breath, "All right then. Have you ever heard of a spy who reaches the end of his career will kill his own people? Have you ever heard of a spy who reaches the end of his career will sacrifice his own life to save the person he wants to kill, regardless of whether he knows martial arts or not?" Lu Yuzhou was stunned and said in puzzlement, Master Qin, you don't need to be so agitated. Speaking of Zhang Xiaohua, why are you talking so much? Shernyo interrupted him in a low, muffled voice and said, Zhang Xiaohua was the one who blocked in front of Manorhead O and killed the black-clothed old man. Lu Yuzhou suddenly understood and stood up to apologize. Master Qin, please don't blame me. This one isn't clear about these things. Aunt Qin took a deep breath and said with a smile, Don't blame me, don't blame me. Master Lu, this one is also a bit anxious. Actually, when Zhang Xiaohua went out to practice his fist techniques, I also sent people to check on him. He was indeed practicing some messy fist techniques. I think he was afraid of being laughed at. I also asked He Tian Shu of the medicine hall about this. Openg heard this and also understood. He smiled and said, that's right. I also remember this name when Yen'er came back. She said that he saved her life. It seems that he was injured by the black-clothed man and fell into the water. I don't know if he's been found yet. Boss Hu continued, He hasn't been found yet. I've already sent people to contact related forces to help find him. Then, he hesitated for a moment and said, However, we've already searched a few dozen miles downstream. There's no sign of him alive or dead. It's been almost a month. There's probably no hope of finding him anymore. There's an 80 to 90% chance that he was killed on the spot by the black-clothed old man. His corpse has already sunk into the river to feed the fish and turtles. Openg nodded and said, no matter what, he saved Yen'er's life. We have to compensate him well. Bossu agreed and said, It's the new year now. The sect is busy. It's not easy to inform him of this kind of thing now. Moreover, he has an older brother who is an armed escort at the Lotus Escort Agency. He's currently on a long escort mission. We'll talk about it when he comes back. Openg nodded silently, and then motioned for Stone Ox to continue. Stone Ox understood and glared fiercely at Liu Yuzhou. He continued with what he had just said and recounted everything that had happened along the way. After listening to Stone Ox, Boss Hu spoke first and said, "The previous robbery should be consistent with our initial speculation. It's to test our power. Hall Master Qin is a famous figure in Jianghu. He must be clear about the details of his martial arts. Stone Ox is not famous in Jianghu, but he must be familiar with the gangs that are familiar with us or pay attention to us. The second competition and Stone Ox's competition on the rainy night are obviously two different situations. I guess they didn't expect He Tianshu from the pharmacy hall. Although this young man's martial arts are not the best, he's an obstacle for them. They can't firmly suppress us with their strength, so they didn't really make a move during the robbery." Openg continued Boss Hu's words and said, "So, they hurriedly found this black-clothed old man with excellent martial arts and made a foolproof arrangement. They let people with similar martial arts to Hall Master Qin stall Stone Ox and the others, and then let the black-clothed old man capture or kill Yin'er? Haha, good plan, good strategy." Boss Hu also smiled and said, "However, they didn't expect that our disciples would see through the clues and send reinforcements to rescue them." Openg also smiled and said, "Yes, this disciple called Lan Dong is very good. He's smart and careful. He went back to the school with the team. Let him hand over some things and choose another disciple to go down. Let him stay in the school and focus on training. He should be of great use." Boss Hu said, "Yes, this time it's all thanks to Lan Dong. Without his news, we would still be in the dark. Second brother and fifth brother wouldn't be able to arrive in time. It's only right to reward him." At this time, Stone Ox opened his mouth and said, "Big gang leader, I think this time the one with the greatest martial arts should be Zhang Xiaohua. If he didn't kill the black-clothed old man, not only the Manor Lord would be in trouble, even if Lan Dong and the others arrived. I'm afraid." Hearing this, Openg nodded and said, "That's right. However, this person is already gone. It's useless to talk about martial arts. Zhang Xiaohua is also not a member of our Misty School. How do you want me to reward him? It's better to give more compensation." Stone Ox scratched his head and said, "Anyway, as long as Big Gang Leader knows who has the most merit, I don't have any other opinions." Liu Yuzhou opened his mouth again and said, "Gang Leader, from Stone Ox's description, I think it should be a gang that we're familiar with or a famous sect in Jianghu. We're familiar with their martial arts and manpower. Naturally, we can't use them. That's why we found people from other places who can't see the light of day to work for them. This is why we didn't have enough manpower during the night attack. Otherwise, with only Eldest Miss and the others, the black-clothed men wouldn't have used any tricks or strategies." Openg smiled and said, "Home Master Liu is right. Since you've explained it this way, you naturally have a plan. I'll leave the investigation to you. I hope you'll be able to find out the truth soon." Liu Yuzhou's face turned bitter and said, "Okay, I'll do my best." Then Openg looked at Stone Ox and Aunt Qin and said, "Hall Master Qin, Stone Ox, you've worked hard before. However, you didn't analyze the situation on the way, and there were flaws in your plans. Tell me, how should you be punished?" Aunt Qin smiled bitterly and said, "Gang Leader is right. I've been careless. If I'd paid more attention, I would have found something fishy long ago. We wouldn't have ended up in an irreversible situation. I'm willing to accept my punishment." Stone Ox scratched his head and said, "Big Gang Leader, I know I'm wrong, and I'm willing to accept my punishment. However, you can punish me however you want, but please don't punish me by not drinking. The last time I went out with Eldest Miss, I didn't dare to drink. If you don't let me have my fill now, I'll suffocate." Everyone laughed, and only then did the atmosphere in the meeting hall become lively. Openg smiled and said, "The two of you have been following us the whole way. Even if you don't have merit, at least you've worked hard. However, Our Misty School has always been fair in its rewards and punishments. We can't give you something to offset your merits. Go back to the disciplinary hall to receive your punishment." Aunt Chin and Stone Ox hurriedly bowed and said, "Understood, gang leader." Then, Openg waved his hand and let Lu Yujo, Aunt Chin, and Stone Ox leave first. After they left, Openg said to Basu, "Eldest senior brother, the year is passing by quickly. In the blink of an eye, it's the 15th of the first month. Everything needs to be planned." Chapter 133. Hulao laughed and said, "Yes, tomorrow after tomorrow, year after year, as if this day last year was yesterday, vivid in my mind. I'm getting old." Li Jian, who had been silent all this time, interrupted and said, "It's because we're old that there are young talents flocking to us." Openg said with a smile, "Second brother is right. Didn't we all go through the same thing when we were young? However, I don't believe that eldest senior brother is old. Now that eldest senior brother's inner strength is profound. He is also a famous expert in the Jianghu. Although he is old, his ambition is still 1,000 miles away. He still has a lot of potential." Lu Qingyang, Lu Laowu, shouted, "What's there to be afraid of? When you're old, you could just eat the longevity pill." Hearing this, Hu Lao frowned and said solemnly, "Laowu, what did I say last year? Don't tell me you've forgotten?" Lu Laowu shrunk his neck and muttered, This, of course I haven't forgotten your teachings. I just said it casually." Hu Lao looked around the hall and said, "I'll repeat it again today. My Misty School doesn't have any longevity pill. You've only heard about it. Remember." Everyone replied, "Understood, eldest senior brother." Then Su Peiwa, Su Laowu, asked, "Third brother, when will Laowu come back?" Openg said with a smile, "I just received news that Laowu and Shui Yuping have already made their move. They should be back tomorrow or 2 days later." Su Laowu said, "In the past, we 6 brothers used to spend the new year together. Now that there's the Luo Shui gang, we've left Laowu outside. I miss him a little." Openg said, "The Luo Shui gang situation has just stabilized. Naturally, there needs to be someone to oversee it. Shui Yuping's martial arts are good, but she's not good at scheming. Laowu can go over to help. Moreover, for the new year, the gang leader naturally has to be in a gang. Since I'm not going to Luo Shui, Shui Yuping will have to be there. Anyway, they'll be back soon." Hu Lao laughed and said, "Laowu is right. If you're the gang leader, you naturally have the responsibility of the gang leader. You have less time for yourself. However, third brother, even though it's still the new year, today's new year is very different from last year's." Openg and the others looked at Big Boss, who with a smile, feeling proud in their hearts. Boss, who continued, "In the short span of a year, our Misty School's strength has increased by quite a bit. Our brothers' martial arts have also become outstanding. Not to mention, we have also joined forces with the Luo Shui gang, allowing our Misty School to develop both on land and on water. This is one good news after another." Old Fifth Lu suddenly interrupted, "Sesame blossoms and grows higher and higher." Everyone was stunned for a moment before they smiled and said, "Old Fifth's words are absolutely correct." Su Laolu was puzzled and asked, "Fifth brother, when did you learn to drop your bag?" Old Fifth Lu rolled his eyes and said, "If I don't read, I can't listen." So that was how it was. Everyone was delighted. When everyone finished laughing, Openg continued Hu Lao Da's words and said, "This is all thanks to the secret plane. Therefore, today, I ask you to stay behind to talk about the treasure hunt in the secret plane in a few days." Hearing this, Old Fifth Lu and Su Laolu did not speak. For this kind of discussion, they always only brought their ears and their mouths to drink. As for Li Jian, his face was still as calm as water. His eyes occasionally moved, but no one knew what he was thinking. Openg had already known about this situation. His words were directed at everyone, but his eyes were looking at Big Boss Who. Big Boss Who laughed and said, "Third brother, what are your thoughts? Let's listen first. Fourth brother is not here now. When he comes back, you can have a good discussion with him." Openg said, "In fact, it's very simple. Eldest senior brother, my opinion is the same as before. It's better for us to deal with the changes by sticking to the status quo. It's better for us to send an inconspicuous disciple. Big Boss who frowned and said, during this period of time, the strength of our Misty School has greatly increased. The strength of our elite disciples has also greatly increased. It will definitely fall into the eyes of some discerning people. It's inevitable that they will pay more attention to some of our actions. If we only send a disciple, we have to consider the safety issue. Openg said with a smile, it's precisely because people will pay attention to it that we should do this. If you and I go, won't we attract more attention? It's better to send more disciples out and set up some smoke screens so that they can't figure out what we're going to do. In fact, I think that the secret plane may be known by others sooner or later. We can only hide it for as long as we can. We could take advantage of this time to get as much benefits as possible. Big Boss who asked again, so this time, we still let Yinming Jusher lead the operation? Openg said with a wry smile, there's no other way. He has been there twice and is familiar with it. Moreover, he is the only one among the four forces that doesn't attract the attention of Jianghu people. If we don't let him go, who else can we send? Big Boss who laughed and said, Yinming Jusher is an honest and wonderful person with a good reputation. However, in front of the treasure, who won't be greedy? I hope he won't do anything stupid. Openg said, we choose him because he is the weakest among the four forces. Before he does anything, he will think it over. Big Boss who said, in that case, I have no objection. What about you? Big Boss who turned to look at the others. Lu Laowu and Su Laolu were sipping wine. When they heard the eldest senior brother's question, they had no time to swallow the wine and just nodded hurriedly. Li Lauer said in a low voice to show his agreement. Seeing this, Big Boss who said with a smile, we have no objection. You go ahead and do it first. When Laosi comes back, we can discuss the specific details. By the way, it's better not to disclose this matter to Shui Yuping. After all, we may know a person's face, but not his heart. It can make us completely relieved. Openg said with a smile, don't worry, eldest senior brother. The fewer people who know a secret, the more confidential it is. Big Boss who said, well, this matter is settled. I'm relieved that you can do it. You can do it. The rest of the people also had the same look in their eyes and felt the same. Openg was speechless. He rubbed his nose with his fingers and smiled bitterly. Let's not talk about how Openg arranged the troops and arranged the disciples to release the smoke screen the next day. Let's talk about Zhang Xiaohua, who had been labeled as a glorious death. He had no idea that he had enjoyed the treatment of dying in the line of duty. He was just bored by the boring wait. It was snowing outside the cottage. It didn't stop until dawn. The sky also cleared up. The bright sunlight shone on the dozens of miles of frozen ground. Standing by the river, looking at the frozen jade belt and the snow-covered mountains, the golden sunlight hit one's face. The scene was extremely magnificent. If one appreciated such an artistic conception calmly, one might be able to comprehend something. Unfortunately, what the impatient Zhang Xiaohua wanted to see was not a static picture. What he wanted was a moving portrait of the people who came to find him. Unfortunately, in this desolate wilderness, whether there was snow or not, there were no signs of people. Now that the river was frozen, there were no boats. Zhang Xiaohua was annoyed. He picked up a stone and threw it at the layer of ice on the water. With a light kacha sound, the stone broke through the layer of ice and fell into the river. Then, with a plop sound, it disappeared without a trace. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly realized that the layer of ice was not thick. He had wanted to jump on it to play, but now that he thought about it, his forehead was sweating. After a while of fear, Zhang Xiaohua could no longer keep his empty mind. He hurried back to the cottage. Using his fingers and toes to count, he realized that he had left the team for more than a month. Until now, no one had come to find him. Perhaps he was too optimistic. Zhang Xiaohua laughed at himself. The entire team's mission was to protect Oyan's safety. When they were attacked by the men in black, the first thing they thought about was how to protect Oyan. How could they spare more people to find him? Thinking about this, Zhang Xiaohua who felt neglected, could not help but feel angry. They were all humans. They were all born of humans. Why couldn't they treat them equally? If they were born of demons, he would not be so calculated with them. Also, he stood up and saved the village head. Why did they give him some love and care? Why didn't they come to find him and let him feel the warmth of the mountain? This guy had wronged the people in the village. Why didn't he think about how far he had drifted? How could they find him? However, the kind Zhang Xiaohua immediately turned that trace of grief into worry for Yin and Xiutong. She did not know if her two sisters would be able to escape safely. Perhaps it was because they were still in danger that they could not send people to find him. Look, he had already learned to find excuses for others. What kind country boy? Thinking about this, Zhang Xiaohua did not want to wait here for nothing. Thinking about the days, it should be the new year now. The desire to sit around the stove with his family immediately turned into motivation to move forward. Zhang Xiaohua quickly walked back to the cottage. After tidying up a little, he prepared to get up. When it came to packing, all he had to do was find a handy walking stick. Zhang Xiaohua had drifted along with the crowd and had nothing on him except for the small sword in his hand. Now that he was leaving, all he had was a money pouch he had picked up. Of course, the most important thing in the money pouch was money. If not for the slippery ground after the snow, Zhang Xiaohua probably wouldn't have even bothered to pick up the walking stick. Zhang Xiaohua carefully closed the wooden door of the cottage. Looking around the place where she had lived for more than a month, she was reluctant to leave. Naturally, the kind-looking Shirtai and the cold, arrogant but pitiful Miss Xiaoming appeared in her mind. She did not know how they were doing now. In a vast sea of people, she did not know where they were. Perhaps she would never see them again in this life. Zhang Xiaohua shook her head. Her left hand touched the little toy that already had an owner. She smiled bitterly and turned to walk out of the small yard. On the left side of the cottage, there was a small path along the river. Before it snowed, Zhang Xiaohua could still see it clearly. Now, there was no trace of it. Zhang Xiaohua could not clear all the snow on the path. Therefore, she could only walk along the river and stagger. When Shirtai left, he had explained the way out very clearly. Zhang Xiaohua also remembered it clearly. Unfortunately, they had only told her the path without snow. After the snow, the world was white. There were no signs, no directions, no directions. Zhang Xiaohua regretted it. What should she do? Did she have to go back to the cottage and wait until the snow melted again? However, it was already winter. If she wanted to wait until the snow melted, wouldn't it be better to wait until spring came? Thinking of sitting alone in the cottage, Zhang Xiaohua felt a headache coming on. She immediately dismissed the idea of going back and continued walking along the river. The path did not always follow the river. When she reached a certain place, Zhang Xiaohua estimated and immediately turned in another direction. After walking for a while, she saw a forest. Zhang Xiaohua was secretly happy. This was exactly what Shirtai had described. She must have gone the right way. Therefore, she identified the direction and plunged in. However, once she entered the forest, Zhang Xiaohua could not help but complain. The snow in the forest was not less than outside at all. There's also a lot of withered grass and dry branches. It was very inconvenient to walk. Even if there was no snow, it was still very difficult to walk. Was this the path that Shirtai had taken when he went out? Zhang Xiaohua had great doubts in her heart. In fact, Shirtai was right. Zhang Xiaohua's memory was even more correct. However, Shirtai seemed to have forgotten that she had always used lightness skill to walk this path. How could she walk step by step like Zhang Xiaohua? Shirtai had forgotten, and Zhang Xiaohua did not know either. As she walked, she secretly admired Shirtai. The older the ginger, the spicier it was. The younger generation could not compare with her in terms of hardships. This Shirtai walked such a difficult path every day. She left early and returned late. She was really a role model for her generation. But after walking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua's heart no longer had longing and admiration. Anyone who walked for a long time in the vast snow forest would have feelings. Yesterday, Zhang Xiaohua had just tasted this feeling. In front of delicious food, she did not think. Today, she tasted this difficult path again. It was inevitable that she would complain in her heart. How did Shirtai find such a hidden place? Could it be that she also floated over the river like herself? Moreover, the most terrible thing was that Zhang Xiaohua did not notice at all. Step by step, he slowly deviated from his original direction. When he finally walked out of the dense forest and looked up, he was surprised to find that in front of him was not the small hill that Shirtai had mentioned, but a flat field. Zhang Xiaohua was immediately dumbfounded. Obviously, she was lost. However, this ending was not out of Zhang Xiaohua's expectations. Zhang Xiaohua was very confident in her ability to have a poor sense of direction. It was almost impossible to not get lost after walking such a long path without clear markings. After a moment of silence, Zhang Xiaohua identified the direction and walked down firmly. Anyway, as long as she walked patiently, she would reach a village or town one day. It was hard to say whether Zhang Xiaohua was lucky or unlucky. In the other direction of the dense forest, which was the direction that Shirtai had pointed out, the hill was not much shorter than the mountain behind the cottage. Now, it was covered with snow, and it was very difficult to climb forward. Even if Zhang Xiaohua walked to the front of the hill correctly, it would be very difficult to climb over it. It was not as easy as Shirtai had said. After you climb over the hill, there will be a large fruit forest in front of you. Follow the path around the fruit forest, and you will see the ferry. Obviously, when Shirtai said climb over, she must have used her lightness skill to climb over it. He wondered if she had thought about it that day when she held Xiao Ming's hand and floated past. With Zhang Xiaohua's ability, would it be easy for her to climb over? Zhang Xiaohua didn't seem to realize that he was walking on an easy path thanks to his poor sense of direction. Zhang Xiaohua took a few steps forward, taking one step at a time. Fortunately, Zhang Xiaohua's injuries were mostly healed, and his physical fitness was top-notch. He didn't feel tired even after walking for a long time. After walking for more than half a day, Zhang Xiaohua saw that the sun was setting in the west. She was anxious. Walking was not a problem, but it was dark. What should she do? She couldn't keep walking. She had to take a rest. Thinking of her habit of sleeping at midnight and looking around where there was no one, Zhang Xiaohua shuddered. So Zhang Xiaohua stopped. Facing the setting sun, she shaded her eyes with her hands and looked into the distance. It seemed that there was a faint mountain range over there. Maybe she could find a cave to stay in there. After making up her mind, Zhang Xiaohua put away her walking stick, took a deep breath, and ran towards the mountain range. With the arrival of dusk, Zhang Xiaohua ran faster. Seeing the mountain range getting closer and closer, her heart became more and more at ease. When she ran closer, there was only a touch of sunset light left on the horizon. Even if Zhang Xiaohua's body was good, she was tired and panting at this time. The slope of the mountain range was gentle, so it was easy to climb. So while she could still see clearly, Zhang Xiaohua climbed while looking for a cave. But the mountain was getting higher and higher. Zhang Xiaohua's heart became colder and colder. The sky was about to turn dark, but she still couldn't find a place to stay. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua had climbed to a high place. Looking up, she couldn't help but be overjoyed. In the distance, there was a shadow of a dark area. It was obviously higher than the side. Zhang Xiaohua quickened his pace and walked closer. The stone in her heart finally fell. If it wasn't an abandoned house, then what was it? Zhang Xiaohua walked closer and took out a match. She lit it and saw that it was a dilapidated mountain temple. Half of the plaque in front of the door had fallen and was hanging there at an angle. She could vaguely see the big words on it, Mountain God Temple. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. How could there be such a temple in the wilderness? But it was also good. Today it helped Zhang Xiaohua. At least she wouldn't have to sleep in the wilderness. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua lit a match and looked around the mountain god temple briefly. Then, he picked up some dried branches around the temple and started a raging bonfire in the temple's hall. After a tiring day, Zhang Xiaohua leaned against the warm fire and ate some dry rations that she brought with her. She immediately felt refreshed. Then, Zhang Xiaohua gathered her thoughts and got into a fighting stance. In this spacious mountain god temple, she practiced the Fist of the North Star 9 times. When the cool energy flowed through her body, Zhang Xiaohua stretched her arms and legs comfortably. These days were really comfortable. Of course, after recuperating from his injuries, Zhang Xiaohua practiced Elder Yu's swordsmanship to the best of his ability. After which, he found some straw at the back of the temple and laid it down beside the bonfire before falling asleep comfortably. Please add it to your collection. Thank you. Chapter 134. The night was boundless, and a half-moon hung in the sky. The white snow reflected a weak white light. In the quiet wilderness, a black dot like a bullet suddenly appeared in the distance and quickly shot towards the snow-covered mountains. That black dot from time to time swept past the branches that stretched into the night sky and stepped on the thick snow without touching the ground. The branches swayed slightly, but the snow did not fall. The snow that was stepped on only left a slight trace. Obviously, this was a very high level of Qigong. It turned out that this was a night walker dressed in black. The black-clothed man's speed was very fast. Not long after, he had reached the bottom of the mountain. The black-clothed man stopped at the bottom of the mountain and then shot up the mountain. His speed was not much slower than when he was on the plains. Not long after, he came to a flat place. He looked around and ran towards a dark place. When he got close, the dark thing showed its outline. Wasn't it the mountain temple where Zhang Xiaohua stayed at night? At this time, the black-clothed man suddenly stopped. He took out something from his arms and slowly walked to the door. He stuck his head out and stared at Zhang Xiaohua, who was sleeping next to a bonfire that was about to extinguish. After listening for a while, he walked in with heavy footsteps. When he entered the temple, under the weak light of the fire, the black dagger in the black-clothed man's hand emitted a cold aura. The black-clothed man saw the young boy lying next to the bonfire and was slightly relieved, but his hand was still holding the dagger. He walked a few steps into the temple and picked up a small stone from the ground. He threw it at Zhang Xiaohua. The stone hit Zhang Xiaohua's hand. It was very light. Zhang Xiaohua was sleeping soundly at this time. How could he feel it? However, it was precisely his lack of feeling and reaction that made the black-clothed man very surprised. He carefully stepped forward and tried to kick Zhang Xiaohua, but he still did not move like a dead pig. The black-clothed man heaved a sigh of relief. It turned out that this person was already dead. The black-clothed man used his finger to test Zhang Xiaohua's nose. Hey, why is he still breathing? The black-clothed man was puzzled. Then, he pushed Zhang Xiaohua with all his strength. But Zhang Xiaohua did not seem to feel anything. He turned over and went back to sleep. When the person saw this, he ignored Zhang Xiaohua and casually picked up a few withered branches from the side and added them to the almost extinguished bonfire. The flames immediately circled around the branches and burned rapidly. The entire temple immediately lit up and warmed up. Not long after, the black-clothed man's eyes looking at the flame suddenly glanced up. He seemed to have noticed something and then stared at the temple door. Sure enough, a black shadow rushed in from outside, bringing in a gust of cold wind. The bonfire swayed left and right. When that person stood still, it was a short and thin night walker. He also had a black cloth wrapped around his head, so people could not see his face clearly. The person who came later looked around the temple and saw Zhang Xiaohua beside the bonfire. He frowned and said, "Mei Laoyao, who is this boy?" The black-clothed man called Mei Laoyao smiled and said, "I don't know. When I got here, this boy was already sleeping here." The black-clothed man who came later said, "Then why don't you go to another place?" Mei Laoyao said unhappily, "Do you think it's easy to find a hidden place? I tried just now. This boy is asleep. I can't do anything. He doesn't have any internal energy. He's probably a country boy who got lost. Shopkeeper Liu, you're too careful." When Shopkeeper Liu heard this, he walked forward and said, "It's better to be safe than sorry. If I wasn't careful, How could I live until now? Shopkeeper Lu walked to Zhang Xiaohua and also looked at him. He kicked him twice. Just as Mei Laoyao said, there was no reaction. However, he was still worried. He used his internal energy and pressed a few acupoints on Zhang Xiaohua's body. He said, "Let him sleep. If I don't hit his sleeping acupoint, I won't feel at ease." Mei Laoyao was still warming himself by the fire. He said, "Okay, you're finally relieved. Come and warm yourself." Shopkeeper Lu sat beside the bonfire and asked, "Mei Laoyao, how did you find this place? I've been in Misty Rain Town for so long. How come I've never heard of a mountain god temple here?" Mei Laoyao said unhappily, "Just because you haven't heard of it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I came to Misty Rain Town for a mission 2 years ago and was discovered by my enemies. When I chased all the way here, I found on the mountain. When I looked for you this time, I suddenly thought that such a secluded place would be the best place to see you." Shopkeeper Lu said with a smile, "That's right. A place that even I don't know of is naturally very appropriate. However, on such a snowy night, only someone as good as you won't leave too many traces on the snow. I can't do that. It's hard to guarantee that I won't be seen." Mei Laoyao sneered and said, "So what if someone sees us tomorrow? Can he know what we talked about tonight? Can he find your shop?" Shopkeeper Lu said with a smile, "You're right, little brother. I'm being overly cautious." Mei Laoyao said, "There's no right or wrong. Once you enter the Jianghu, you can't help yourself. There's a bloody disaster at any time. It's normal to be careful. Oh, okay, let's cut the small talk. What's wrong with the Tan family?" Shopkeeper Lu immediately stopped smiling and said, "The Tan family is managed like a family. I've sent spies to infiltrate them several times, but they all failed. In order not to alert the enemy, I didn't dare to try again." Now, as a jade shopkeeper, I have some connections with their third young master. Mei Laoyao didn't say anything. Seeing this, Shopkeeper Lu didn't know whether the other was happy or sad. He said with a smile, "I know this is far from the requirements of the organization, but I do have some difficulties. You see, I've made friends with some low-level disciples. They can't get close to the core of the Tan family, and they can't find out anything useful. As for the core disciples, not to mention their eldest young master and second young master, who are all outstanding talents and extremely shrewd, even disciples like Tan Wen and Tan Wu, who are slightly from the side branches, have received strict training since they were young. They're strict with themselves in all aspects. It's very difficult to cater to their preferences." Mei Laoyao frowned and said, "This is the truth. The organization also knows this. Didn't they let you come here because they like your specialty? That's why they gave you this tough nut to crack. You have to display the spirit of not being afraid of hardship and not being tired. Bring out the spirit you used to be good at fighting battles. Strive to put a Kongming lantern in this difficult place." Shopkeeper Lu was stunned and said, "This, Brother Mei, what is a Kongming lantern?" Mei Laoyao smiled and said, "Brother Lu, you're just a country bumpkin. A Kongming lantern is a lantern that can be placed in the sky. It's like you've made achievements that people look up to." Shopkeeper Lu cupped his hands and said, I'm impressed. Brother Mei, a scholar who has been away for 3 days must be looked at with new eyes. After your training at the headquarters, your level has improved greatly." Mei Laoyao was also happy. He cupped his hands in a certain direction and said, "This is all a gift from the master. You, and I must be grateful. If you do well this time, you might be able to receive the master's appreciation." When Shopkeeper Lu heard this, he hurried forward and took out an item from his bosom. He carefully placed it in front of Mei Laoyao and said with a smile, "Brother Mei, this is an ancient jade that I received when I was in the countryside last time. It's warm in the winter and cool in the summer. It's very unique. Please accept it and admire it when you're free." Mei Laoyao looked at the item that Shopkeeper Lu handed over and accepted it carelessly. He said with a smile, "Brother Lu, you're so kind. I only have this little hobby, yet you've taken it seriously. Just based on this, it's impossible for me not to improve." Shopkeeper Lu said modestly, "My insignificant skills are nothing compared to Brother Mei. It's like a firefly compared to the bright moon. I hope you'll put in more good words for me in the future. Mei Lao Yao rubbed the item in his hand and said with a smile, "The master is a master who can't tolerate sand in his eyes. Naturally, he will reward those who make a contribution and punish those who make a mistake. If Brother Lu can have some achievements, I'll also be able to benefit from it." Shopkeeper Lu said, "Isn't that still dependent on the master's guidance and brother's support?" Mei Lao Yao smiled and didn't say anything else. He just played with the ancient jade in his hand. Shopkeeper Lu saw that his goal had been achieved and said, "However, I heard Third Young Masterton talk about some things in the past few days. There are actually some clues." Mei Lao Yao made a sound of surprise and said, "Tell me about it. Perhaps you've made some new discoveries." Shopkeeper Lu said, "According to Third Young Master Tan, the Tan family sent out many disciples before and after the new year. It seemed like there were many missions." Third Young Master Tan was a bit puzzled. Although the family usually had some affairs outside, they were all scattered at different times. He hadn't seen any disciples go out at the end of the year. He was very puzzled. Mei Lao Yao said, "Then did you ask him what kind of missions they were?" Shopkeeper Lu said with a smile, "How would I dare to ask such a sensitive question?" However, listening to his vague meaning, he also didn't know. Moreover, when he asked the family head, he was reprimanded. Haha, if he hadn't been reprimanded, he wouldn't necessarily have told me. Mei Lao Yao asked again, "If Third Young Master Tan didn't know, then what about Eldest Young Master Tan and Second Young Master Tan? Did they make any movements? Did they also go out on missions?" Shopkeeper Lu shook his head and said, "No, they're all staying at the Tan family's old residence." Mei Lao Yao frowned and said, "That's a bit strange. If something really happened, the eldest and second in the family would definitely go out to take care of the overall situation. They're all staying at home. Presumably, the Tan family suddenly encountered some trivial matters. You should carefully investigate and see if you can find anything." Shopkeeper Lu said with a smile, "Brother Mei is wise." Mei Lao Yao smiled and said, "Brother Lu, there's no need to be like this. Back then, we were all brothers who slept on the same con. Although our positions are different now, and we each have our own division of labor, this is still the need of work. You and I are both stones in the organization. We move wherever we need to. There's no need to be so polite in private." Shopkeeper Lu said with a smile, I wouldn't dare. I can't even run faster than you can walk. I'd better listen to you honestly." Mei Lao Yao smiled and didn't insist. After a while, Shopkeeper Lu seemed to have thought of something and said, "That's right, Brother Mei. There seems to be one more thing. I don't know if it's useful." Mei Lao Yao smiled and said, "There's no harm in saying it. I'll also give you a reference." Shopkeeper Lu said, "Some time ago, Third Young Master Tan vaguely said that his two older brothers used to often practice martial arts with him. In the past year, they didn't practice martial arts together with Third Young Master Tan. Moreover, they never sparred with Third Young Master Tan. Sometimes, when he was itching to spar with his two older brothers, they would use all kinds of excuses to refuse. He was very puzzled. Later, he seemed to eavesdrop on a disciple of an unorthodox school saying that his two older brothers' martial arts had improved greatly and were already among the best of the Tan family's younger generation." Speaking up to this point, Shopkeeper Lu stole a glance at Mei Lao Yao and said, "However, Third Young Master Tan scoffed at this, saying, 'The three of them are the direct descendants of the Tan family. Their martial arts have been passed down in the family since they were young. It's normal for them to be among the best.' Brother Mei, do you think this information is useful?" Mei Lao Yao said, "Brother Lu, this information is very important. I'll definitely tell this information to His Majesty personally. You should properly record this merit." Shopkeeper Lu said happily, "Then many thanks, Brother Mei." However, he immediately felt somewhat puzzled and asked, "Brother Mei, please understand the Meis. This humble one doesn't feel anything unusual about this information." Mei Lao Yao said with a smile, Brother Lu, this is the difference between the central and local governments. The asymmetry of information naturally means that the estimation of information is different. I'll tell you the truth. Do you know why you were specially transferred to this Tan family village from another place last year? Shopkeeper Lu shook his head blankly. Mei Laoyao said in a low voice, "His Majesty has an old friend who isn't very close to him. In the past, he had quite a bit of conflict with Tan Yefeng. However, that Tan Yefeng's martial arts were quite different from his, so Tan Yefeng had always endured and didn't make a move. Who knew that at the beginning of last year, His Majesty received news that Tan Yefeng had fought his old friend and was actually killed by Tan Yefeng under Shadowless feet. His Majesty was very astonished. How did Tan Yefeng's martial arts improve so much? That's why this brother found an opportunity to transfer Brother Lu here." Shopkeeper Lu suddenly understood. Mei Laoyao continued in a low voice, "This matter belongs to the level of confidentiality." This humble one was also afraid that Brother Lu wouldn't understand and lose useful information for no reason. That's why this humble one told you the truth. I hope that Brother Lu can keep this a secret and pay more attention to this in the future. If you get credit, won't this humble one also be able to recommend you for merit? Shopkeeper Lu hurriedly bowed and said, "I understand, Brother Mei. Now that I have a general direction, I won't fish in troubled waters. I believe that with third young Master Tan as a breakthrough point, I definitely won't disappoint His Majesty's expectations and Brother Mei's recommendation." Mei Laoyao also nodded. The two of them talked a little more. When the sky was a little brighter, they went down the mountains separately. The two of them were discussing such confidential matters in a temple in the wilderness, but they only hit Zhang Xiaohua's sleeping acupoint and treated him as a dead object. They didn't avoid him at all. Moreover, when they left, they didn't do the shady business of cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots. They just patted their butts and left. In fact, that wasn't the case. The man in black who came first, Mei Laoyao, didn't intend to let Zhang Xiaohua live until the morning. Therefore, he didn't look at Zhang Xiaohua's face at all. He was just a little boy who was lost. When he left, he casually hit his dead acupoint. How could he have a chance to live? However, the man in black who came later, Shopkeeper Lu, was cautious. He hit Zhang Xiaohua's sleeping acupoint first. He knew Shopkeeper Lu's strength. It wouldn't dissolve by itself without 24 hours. The bonfire in the temple had been extinguished when the two of them were talking. They didn't add any dead branches. Who could survive a day in this winter when a drop of water would turn into ice? In the minds of Mei Laoyao and Shopkeeper Lu, no matter why this child came to this mountain temple, it was his bad luck. They were virtuous not to hit his dead acupoint. There was no reason for him to go out alive. He would definitely be frozen to death. Before Mei Laoyao left, he also wanted to give him a kick. Unfortunately, Shopkeeper Lu let him go first. How could he have a nerve to doubt Shopkeeper Lu's way of handling things in front of him? He could only go out first and act like a leader who trusted Shopkeeper Lu. In their eyes, killing people to silence them was as easy as slapping their hands to kill a fly. They didn't take it to heart. However, I didn't think about it. A young man was lost in a barren mountain. It wasn't easy for him to find a place to sleep. He was sleeping soundly. What did that have to do with him? How could they just hit his sleeping acupoint and freeze him to death? If that was the case, it would be better for him to die at that time. He would have to suffer such torture before his death. Unfortunately, heaven helps the worthy. After the two people left for a long time, the sky gradually brightened. A ray of sunlight flashed across the mountain temple. Zhang Xiaohua, whose sleeping acupoint had been hit, suddenly opened her eyes. As usual, a ball of light flashed in her eyes. She stretched her body and sat up. She looked around and saw the ashes of the bonfire that had lost its heat. Only then did she remember what happened last night. She stretched herself and secretly rejoiced. If she didn't have this temple, she didn't know how to get through the long night. After wiping her face with the snow outside, Zhang Xiaohua pulled herself together and started practicing her fist and sword techniques. She only stopped when her body was completely comfortable. She ate some dry rations and prepared to go down the mountain to find a town. But when she left the mountain temple and looked at the snowy mountains, Zhang Xiaohua frowned. The shirt eye was really harmful. What kind of secluded place was this? She had walked for an entire day before arriving at this mountain range. How should she proceed from here? Just as she was hesitating and cursing in frustration, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes suddenly lit up. She could see a few rows of footprints in front of the steps of the mountain temple. Those small footprints were naturally Zhang Xiaohua's own. There were also a few rows of larger footprints beside them. Needless to say, they were definitely left behind by others who came to the mountain temple. Zhang Xiaohua was excited. When she came here yesterday, it was already dark, so she naturally didn't see them. Now that it was daybreak, they pointed her in the right direction. This mountain temple was really efficacious. No wonder there were still people coming here, even though it was so remote. However, there didn't seem to be any idols in the mountain temple. But why would Zhang Xiaohua care if there were idols or not? After thanking this inexplicable god in her heart, Zhang Xiaohua packed up and prepared to follow the footprints to find town. At the very least, she should be able to find a place with signs of human habitation. Please add it to your collection. Thank you. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.